Hi everyone, my name is Stephen Simon and welcome to CSharpCorner Presents Angular Virtual Conference. Thank you so much everyone for joining today. It's going to be an exciting 10 hours conference joined by the speakers from across the globe. I'm your host Stephen Simon as always and I'll be there with you for next 10 hours. I'm really excited and looking forward for this conference as we do conferences and live show maybe every weekend and every weekend we do on every weekdays we do live show and every weekend we do virtual conferences. So in this conference we are actually going to talk about Angular and the latest features of Angular 10 that have come. Not particularly my subject, but you're going to learn a lot about these new features from our speakers joining us today. And before I go and even bring the speakers and the welcome note, let me go ahead and introduce and talk a little about the CSharpCorner. So CSharpCorner is a global community of software developers and IT professionals that was founded in December 1999 by Mahesh. We are one of the largest members contribution-based community for developers, and we have over 50 plus local user chapters. If you go to C Sharp Corner platform, we not only have content related to C Sharp programming language, but over 160 different technologies. And for some stats, we rank around 2,500 in the world. In the year 2019, we served over 24 million visitors, and our top 5 countries are India, USA, UK, and Germany. I suggest go to C Sharp Corner platform. You can get articles, videos, code snippets, free ebook, and a lot more. All this for community and free of cost. And now let me call upon Nishu and Santosh for the welcome keynote for this Angular Virtual Conference. Hi Nishu, hi Santosh, welcome to the conference.
Hey Simon, thanks for sorry Stephen, thanks for having us.
Yeah, I think you can call me Simon. People like to call me Simon.
Thanks for having us.
Okay.
That's great. So I really like to thank you both for joining us today for the welcome note and also for the session that you both had. I think your both session is in the first half, right? So I think it's going to be a really exciting conference. Why don't you go ahead and talk a little about what we are going to cover today, starting from a little bit about your introduction. Nishu, you first.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, really thank you to all of you for joining the conference today. I'm sure you love Angular because you are here, right? And I'm sure you're as excited as me to be learning new things today, be it zones, be it RxJS, be it reactive forms, be it creating libraries, be it optimizing your Angular applications, right? So with Angular 10 out there, I'm sure you might have a lot of questions and you might want to ask a lot of questions. And trust me, this is the place. This is the conference that we are doing. And all of us, be it the GDEs, be it the Google developer experts, or be it somebody from the Google team who's working on Angular, all of us are here. This is the place. Have any questions? Do ask. Strike them out, and it's the best place. So yeah, Santosh, you can take it from here.
Yes, thank you, Nishu. So I mean, yes, I agree with Nishu. But before, let me just introduce myself. My name is Santosh Yadav, and I'm one of the Google developer expert from India for Angular from India. And yes, I'm really excited to actually because we just got Angular 10 released, and people do have a lot of questions in the community. And then this is the platform where you can actually ask those questions. We have Minko from the Angular team who will be talking about the state of Angular. So what's gonna come or what's happening in within the Angular team. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. A lot of developers struggle with RxJS, so we have two core members from RxJS talking about different topics. But of course, you can connect with them anytime, and then you can ask questions related to RxJS, because this is the best way actually to know the community members or the core team who are available, and how to connect with them. Of course, at the end of the session, they will be sharing their details. You can always reach out to them. I have seen, for example, if I have any question related to RxJS, Jan, Nicholas Wortman, and Michael Haldaki, they are always reachable. Similarly, all other members, like we have Nishu, we have Siddharth talking about Ivy. So a lot of great community members talking about different topics, and this is the platform to actually connect with them in case you have any questions in future. Also, it's not like once conference is over you won't be able to ask the questions. In future also, you can keep in touch and you can ask questions. So I'm really excited about it. Stephen,
That
over to
that
you.
And
that's
Yeah.
yeah, since this is just the start of the conference, right? I'm really curious to ask all of you who are attending the session today to put in the purpose of you attending the conference. I mean, why do you attend conferences? And what is the, what motivates you to attend even the virtual conferences, though they are not in person events, you're not actually meeting the person, but then you're still motivated enough to join a conference. So we would really like to know in the chat section that why, what motivates you.
Yeah, that's really interesting, right? So we have moved from the offline conferences to the online one, and this gives a platform to reach a lot more new audience and reaching a better the ecosystem that we have. So that's really interesting. That if you are joining us today, let us know what makes you join, and let us also know where you're joining from. I see people joining from USA, Brazil. So quite a good fact about these virtual conferences. And talking about the conference that we have today, so we have divided this conference into two halves. The one that you're watching right now is the first half that will be taken by Pankaj, Siddharth, Santosh, Minko, and Nishu. And after that, we are going to have 15 minutes break, and you guys can go and grab a coffee or a tea. And then we're going to come back with the second half with Natalia, Srishti, Devashis, Ankit, Jan, Michael, and Alex. My goodness, it's going to be a really, really long day. And I'm really excited for this. So let me ask, and if I'm not wrong, Nishu and Santosh, we have almost like 7 GDE, two guys from Google, right? One from RSJX. I don't know what does that mean, but yeah, and so some C#Corner MVPs too. So how does it feel like you're sitting back at your home and connecting to people from your community across the globe?
Yeah. So of course, that's what I said, right? It is a great opportunity to connect with the community members out there. As I said, Jan is from RxJS core team, where a lot of people struggle with. Then we have a lot of GDs talking about different topics. And in case you have any questions, you know how to reach them in future, right? Yeah, Nishu, over to you.
Yeah, it's like, it's like the place for getting your questions
Yeah.
answered, for enhancing and upskilling yourself, enhancing your knowledge. And then, I mean, there should be no questions that you're left with. Just, put in all the questions that you have. It should be a target that, okay, I have these many questions that I'm confused about or I'm doubtful about, and my agenda is to get all those answered. I'm not leaving the conference without getting all those answered. So that should be your agenda, and it's like the place, and make the best out of it.
Yeah, and I think we have started getting some of the answers from the viewers. Rather, Christian says, "I want to attend the virtual conference to stay updated and connected with authors and to understand best practice for our next project." And I think this is core to many of the viewers, right? We all come from the development background, right? We all have those documentation available for these all libraries, but one of the best practices that you should follow when you work on the project, I think this is very core to everyone, right? Because I think coding is not tough, right? Syntax is available. You have to to just go and right. But the best practices, right? Best practices. I think that's the best part. And I think that there's one more coming from Sanant Reddy. He says, "It's your name in the speaker list, Nishu, motivated me to attend your contribution on Angular training and sharing content, and not at least my interest towards AngularJS." So, what an amazing appreciation at the very beginning of the conference.
That's great, Sanat. So we have many exciting topics, and I'm sure you would, you would convert into an Angular lover after attending this conference. And then, your next comment would be that it's total interest towards Angular that made you attend one, and you turn into an Angular coder.
Yeah, exactly. And Reddy, Nishu's session is towards the first half, like around 10:45 to 11:30 years timing. So we would really appreciate you. So you stay till up till there, right? So we have 4 to 5 sessions until there. So stick tight, put on your seatbelt. So I think we would love to see you even till that session. And I think the guy saying, Anushka says, the best thing about virtual conferences, you can wherever you are, despite on any place. Exactly. I mean, right now I'm sitting in my home. Nishu's at her comfort place. Santosh has a very nice background with the green screen. Good tech guy,
I think
right?
he's the only one who's actually at the conference. We are at our house, but Santosh is at the conference.
Yeah, exactly, Santosh. Yeah, I think he does a lot of live shows of his own and is a really rock star in the Angular community. So let's go ahead and invite the first speaker of the conference. He is Pankaj Parkar. Pankaj is a senior software engineer working at Teskera. He has a total of 7 years of experience in various front-end technology. He has also been rewarded with Microsoft MVP and Google GDE. So let's welcome Pankaj, the first speaker of our conference. Hi, Pankaj. Welcome to CSharpCorner Angular Conference.
Hey, hi. Hello.
Uh,
Hey, Pankaj, hi.
Hello. Hello,
Hi.
Nishu. Santosh.
so, Pankaj, where you are joining us from today?
From Singapore.
From Singapore, right? So, what's time over there? It's like 6:30 or something.
7:45.
It's 7.
7:45 p.m. Yeah.
That's not tough, right? So we have some guys joining at the midnight. So you're at this safe place.
Yes.
so, so so how this life in Singapore? How is all this pandemic?
Pandemic situation is now in controllable situation. So
Hmm.
maybe in community, you can say community spread only 10 members are there, but there is one more. There are two, basically there are two sections. So other section, which is dormitories worker, there the number is great, like 200 to 300 each day. So yeah,
Hmm.
let's see. I
So,
mean,
but yeah, you stay safe. We have somehow managed, Santosh and Nishu, we have somehow managed to stay safe at our place in India, right? The cases are increasing a lot here. So, Pankaj, I think you can go ahead and share your screen, right? And I'll leave you for next 45 minutes with your session.
yeah, sure.
Thank you, Nishu. Thank you, Santosh. I'll see you both once again in your sessions. Thank
Thank you,
you.
Stefan.
Thank you,
Bye.
Pankaj.
Bye, Nishu. Bye, Pankaj.
Yeah, bye. So can you guys see my screen?
Yeah, I need to put it on the stream now. I see Visual Studio, one of your favorite editor, right? And Pankaj, from now, it's all you. Thank you.
Yes. So hello everyone, this is Pankaj, and I'm going to talk about the power of Angular forms. So everyone know that Angular is like one of Angular have a few best things like its own compiler, then you can say its own translation, then forms and binding and other things. So out of which one of the core feature is form. So we are going to take a look at what are the features that are being use that are being used by most of the developer, and how you can use those feature efficiently. So little bit about myself, as Simon mentioned. So I'm senior software engineer working at Deskera, and also I'm MVP and GD. So if you want to follow me anywhere, you can just type in Pankaj Parkar handle, and you can find me on all these platforms: GitHub, Twitter, Facebook. So let's begin with the session. So in this session, I'm going to have a simple form like this, and this form is very simple, which have some fields like which are related to user only, and I have called this as a profile form, user profile form. So in this, you can see that there is a first name, last name, and it seems like email is going to be optional and not optional based on this switch button. Then there is a current address field, and there is a languages. What languages does this user knows? He can add on whatever he required. So there could be, I don't know, I added this 3 language. So let's build this form in Angular form API. Right now, this form is completely in HTML form only. Okay, and what we are going to see in this complete session, this basic one was very basic form without any form API feature. We are going to write a template driven form, then model driven form, and maybe if time allows us, then we can take a look at how type forms can be created. I'm not going to go into the depth of it, but I will just give you a clue how you can do that. Right now, this feature is missing in Angular form. So let's start with the template driven form. So before going to that, I will let you know, like, there are 2 kinds of forms exist in Angular. One is template driven and other one is model driven. So these two are like exactly opposite of each other. In template driven, the way of writing is mostly on template. So you will be adding directives and adding the features on top of that particular form field. But in case of model driven, you will see that you will be enhancing the behavior of your field from your TS file, or you can say the model side. So we will begin with the template driven form. So I just copied that HTML code from whatever we have seen from the basic page to here, and you will see that this whole page is HTML only. So let's look at the HTML side of it. I'm going to close this thing. So this complete project I have created with the CLI, and this is I will going to provide this particular repo URL at the end, and I'm using Angular 10 version. Okay, so most of the thing will be based on, I can say, TypeScript is more strict here. So we will see. So as I did open the template driven route, let me see template driven route. So I have configured the template driven controller here. Component here. So this is the template driven component. This file. Let me see one thing. If I can remove everything. Okay, wait. So it should have ng on it. I was trying something and that's okay. Let's begin and let's do these things. So I'm going to open the template driven HTML. I will increase the font. Of course, it is if it is not visible. I believe this should be fine. Okay, I think this should be fine. So Simon, is this visible properly? Okay, I will proceed. Yeah, so this is simple form, and in form I have used Angular material, so you will see mat form, mat directives. So there is one input which is first name, last name, then email, current address fields like address 1, 2, state, city, postal code, and there is one language array which is repeating over something and putting showing some languages that user profile has added. Okay, so I'm going to comment this out, this language thing, for now. We will look at it sometime later in this session, and let's try to convert this simple HTML into Angular template driven form. Okay, so how to do that? So do you know there is one directive known as ng model, and that ng model directive helps us to implement the two-way binding behavior. Okay, so I think we can use ng model directive in here so that we can make each field of our form as in a two-way binding driven. So I'm going to say add one field, just one field with ng model variable as in first name, and I just saved it, and let's see what happens. So as soon as I saved it, it will automatically refresh, and it said that the first name does not exist, which is first thing. So what we will do is we'll quickly add this first name variable on our inside our component, because this is basically binding with respect to your component to a template. So it tries to evaluate the first name variable with respect to component, and it did not find it. So that's why it throw an error. And let's see what happens now. Let me refresh this page, and everything is not fine. So there is a problem with this. So it said that you cannot define a control without a name. At least it should have a name or just say standalone. So I'm going to also add a name property on top of it. Name, and then this will be first name, and let's see what happens. Should it work? Yes, it should. Correct. Yeah, it should work. So when you use any form API, you should make sure that you are also importing the two modules in your app module import. So one is forms module and then the reactive forms module. Without that, it won't work. It will throw an error because you are using some directives that exist in those particular modules. Okay. So let's go ahead and do the same thing in for other fields like first name, then last name, then email, then addresses. I'm going to remove this for now. Addresses. Then I'm going to rename the name attribute afterwards, but right now I'm just pasting it so that I can do it faster. State, and then this one. Okay, and let's go ahead and rename the. Then this one is email. What this is first name, which is address. This is address too, and same way we have other field which is state and then city. City, correct? Not city, postal code. Sorry, postal code. So and like before we got an error like first name is defined here, but it is not defined inside the TypeScript. So we have to define this all variable inside our this thing in template file. Otherwise, you will get an error. See, there are errors because it is saying address to is not defined in the component. So quickly, I will define these things here. Email, postal code, I think, postal code, address one, state, and anything else remaining. Let's save it and see. I just saved everything and we'll refresh the page. Okay, something is remaining. Do you mean address 2 and address? Address is here, address 1, address 2. Email is there, address 2. Okay, this is missing, city. Just going to refresh the page after. Am I doing the changes in correct file? Okay, component.ds, template driven, template driven. Okay, so what's the problem? Address 2 does not. Do you mean address? Address 2. Okay, address field have a problem. Let's see. What's the problem with that? Address. I said address and then address, and address should be existing here. That's there. So what's the problem? Save it. There's a problem with postal code as well. Okay, I understood. This is conflicting. This must be conflicting with the postal code. So that postal code error will go away. And what else is remaining? Address. For now, I will.
Pankaj, I think some of the guys have helped you in the comment. They're saying, I think you missed to rename one of the input, maybe address 2.
Okay, address to address to.
That's fine, I think, right?
Yeah, that's fine. I think so. I will comment out this thing and then we'll see.
Yeah, exact. That will work.
Yeah. And then I can figure out later. Okay. We'll see first block is working fine or not. Yeah, this is working fine. So that means there is no problem. I will quickly figure it out what's going wrong here. And then address is fine. Address to is also fine. Mat input. Okay, that is also fine. Mat input, this thing. I'll just remove this. I think so. There is a problem with maybe this guy. Address one. Address. I will refresh this quickly. There is a problem with address to address to address to, and it is saying that does not exist in a template one component.html. Oh, I should say address one here. That's it. Yeah, this should be fixed now. Mistakenly, I just limit to address to. Okay, now it should work. Yeah. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to see like this is now everything is in single form only. What that means is we have a form and inside that there are multiple element exist. So each form field is generally known as form control or form field. So right now they are bounded using the ng model variable. So let's quickly check if they are changing correctly or not. Okay, and I will quickly add some value. Once it is refreshed, you can see the value here. So as you can see that, so that means it is happening. But now we want to represent this form collectively, correct? It should be a single object which is going to represent the form. So how to do that in Angular? So to do that, you can use uh, a particular directive known as ngForm, and this form directive is exportable, meaning you can get the value of this form, this ngForm directive, which is going to be this the collective value of your form controls, which is first name, last name, and other controls, and put it inside some variable, maybe profile form, and that way you can get hold of it. So now what you have is now if you do profile form dot value, you will see that everything that is included inside the form, it is going to be, you are going to have it inside the profile form eventually. And let's see that. So now you will see that you have this value in two places basically. One is inside your model, which is first name, last name, email, and the other place where you are maintaining the total form, which is ng form. So you might ask me like, Pankaj, why we did the name, I mean, same attribute, name, this first name, and then we said ng model. Is there a shorter way of doing that? Or what if I change the name attribute to see what happens? So you will see that you have said that I just changed the name attribute, and what you are saying over here, I have two-way binding variable, which is first name, which exists inside a model, and inside a form, the form will hold a value of this first name one, which will be the value of first name. So let's see what happens. So as soon as you do that, you will see that the name attribute reflects inside the ng form, and the ng model will stay as is. Okay. So this is one of the good thing about Angular form. And what else we can do is, so you have seen that like This is very simple way, but generally when we retrieve a value from the server for particular entity, like in this case, we have a profile form, correct? So when we retrieve the information for this, it will come as in single object. So what you will find that when you are going to assign a value for each of each of this value, you have to explicitly bind this value, correct? So rather you can have something like this. You can have a model, correct? And then for that model you can assign a value, correct? Like this. Uh, so suppose after some time, so I just presume that this is an Ajax call. I'm just going to use set timeout, maybe 5 seconds. And after 5 seconds, you are going to receive a value of model, and that model value can be this thing, first name, Pankaj. Similar way, there could be some last name, then email. There will be some value. Address will be suppose anything which is, and then state and city, correct? So city can be Mumbai, and then address can be anything. And you will get this, retrieve this value from the server, and you will bind it to the your model, correct? Generally this case will happen. So in this case, what you can easily do is you can easily use this, replace this particular this thing, what I can say, models, correct? Ng model to model dot, correct? So let me do that quickly. So this will make sure that whatever you are getting a value from the server, it will reflect, correct? Name one. Why? So model dot first name. Like, did I save it? Okay. Okay. Nice. Model. Okay. Let's see what happens here. Error. Postal code 123. What's the problem now? Oh wait, sorry. This is Angular 10, so it is very strictly typed. So it should be, I should specify any so that it will work. Because right now by default the object type will be inferred as an object, model type will be inferred as an object. So it was not allowed me to add on those properties. So now it will work. Okay, so you will see two things. Form will hold its own form value, and your what I can say, your this thing, your what I can say. Wait a minute. Your ng model will have its own value like this. So if you see the model also, you will see that there is the same value. Only the difference is you are saying that when it goes to the form. So suppose you want some mapping, like first name will be like this, but while sending it in the while form value you supposed to send, it should change, so you can directly change the name mapping here. Okay, so that way it can be good. So let's see. See, both places you are seeing some changes, and both are the object. So this way it is very nice. So let's look at how you can add the validation over your template driven form. So as I said, template driven form is mostly a place where you will be writing most of the code a declarative way. When I say declarative way, you would be using some directives or some HTML form only to say something to the form. So suppose in case I want to make this first name field as in required. So I have to write a required attribute so that it will make sure that this first name should be passed to make this form as invalid. Also, I can mention some max length as well. So this way you can easily add the validation on your fields. Okay. So let's see what happens if I do that. For now, I'm going to just comment out this model, or I just going to remove it, and we'll see what happens. Okay, I changed that, and see if I try to add, if I try to not pass this first name field, after 5 seconds it will be populated. Okay, or if I exceed the value 10, okay, max length meaning you cannot go beyond that. So that's good thing. But if you not pass any value, it is saying that the form has a problem, which is it is required. So basically, in these cases we just don't want to highlight that field as in red. We should supposed to provide some information to user, like what went wrong, correct? So in such cases, what you can do is you can just show that error to the user based on some things. So over here I'm going to use mat error directive. This helps us to show the error on the page, and this error should be shown when it should be shown. So to do that, suppose you want to get an information of first name field in terms of form control. I mean, in terms of form. So you can just write first name control as in template variable, like what we did over here. So as the ng form is exportable, meaning you can get the value of ng form and store it in the template variable, same way you can export the value of ng model. So in here I am going to say take a value of ng model. This is going to be a control value, and let's see what's there inside this first name control value. So you will see that. Let me quickly go over the UI, and this is value. Okay. So what ideally it should do, it should show the value of uh, where is it? At error first name control dot value, correct? Did I save it? Okay. So whenever error happens, right. So it should ideally show this. Wait a minute, I'm just going to do something with it. So whenever you want to show this, let's look at the error directly, and then we can see what happens. What is there inside the error object. So like value, there will be errors, then there will be values, pristine or touched. Those kind of attributes will be present on this first name form control. Okay, let's see what happens on the UI. Why it is not appearing the error thing which I just added. Okay. So whenever error is going to be there, it will show that. Okay. As soon as, so it says that I just tried to print what value? Errors value. So similarly, it have a different thing like value. Is the field is pristine or not? Pristine meaning it is touched or not. Also touched. First time, I mean, it is clear or not. I mean, even if it is first time touched or not. So let's see what it shows here in case of error. So of course the pristine is going to be false because we have already touched it. So see, true. That means the value is, this one is true, and this will not be show anything because it is undefined. So it won't show any value. Okay, so this way we can add your errors here. So in this case, what we want to do is we want to show an error when the field is required. In that case, we have to intimate user. So that case, what you can say is there is one method exists on your form control has error, and inside has error you can pass required. Inside that you can say first name is required. And that was a long way, and I mean that is the shorter way where you can call the has error method on the control and directly pass what kind of error you are looking for. And there is other way also, so I will show that other way as well. See, first name is required, error coming. So the other way is you can directly say that if first name control dot errors dot required is true, then just show this. In this way, you can add on multiple error things. Like we also have a max length, and also there could be different things. So this way, you can easily add the errors. And let's see what happens if I change this. So this has eventually shown that the first name is required, correct? Okay. let me move on to the next part where suppose what you want to do is you want to dynamically change the validation of the fields. Like suppose for now I am just considering one option where there are field exist on the form and you want to make all these field form fields as in required. Right now only the first name is required. I don't know why this thing is happening. Let me quickly clear this out. I'm just commenting the set timeout thing. Okay. Oh, okay. Cannot read required. Okay, that was because of this. If errors are not there, so errors can be null correct sometime. So I use the navigation operator so that this scenario will be handled properly. Cool. Let it get refreshed. Okay, nice. So you will see that right now only the first name field is uh, this thing required. Otherwise, in other case, you won't see an error. So what we want to do is we want to dynamically change the validation of your form in this case. So on click of this, it should make mark all this field as in required. So how can we do that? So to do that, in template driven form, mostly you can pass an attribute to your form field. Like in this case, if you pass directly a required attribute, it will say that this is going to be true. But you can also pass something like this. You can pass a binding with some value. If it is true, then it will apply required validation. Otherwise, it will based on false, it will remove the required attribute. Okay. So I just mentioned one required attribute in here, and I'm going to paste it everywhere. Copy this, and I will place it on each input field. Okay. So this way, city, state, postal code, and let's see what happens. I did not do anything, so because it will throw an error because of the strictness, I will define one variable which is which can be boolean, and for now all the required are false. Okay, initially, and as soon as you click on the button which is on top, we will be adding one event on the click of it. That event can be marked all required, and I will write this method in here. Where at the top. Okay. And this method, what that this method will do is this method will say required is equal to true. That's it. This is very simple operation. By this way, you can understand that you can also add other validation as min, max, and other things. So let's see. So for now, let it get refreshed. Yeah. So so let's the form get loaded with the values. Okay. Now you can see that as soon as I do the mark field as a required, yeah, one thing is happening because by default it treats that once the field is touched or form is submitted, then show the validation. So I'm going to add a button at the bottom, which is going to say form submit button. By default, button type is submit, so no need to do anything. And let's see what happens. And I will also reduce down this time to some milliseconds. Okay, I did that. I'm going to say mark all field as a required. So when I try to submit this form, so but this button is appearing like this because I just see button. It should be mat this button. And you have seen that like when I click on that, it will show the validation everywhere. And you can add a message using mat error and the ng if thing to show what is basically required to be done by user, like last name is required and so on. So we will move on to the next thing where you can just you have the other section which was what was that languages. So I'm going to just comment out this bottom part, which earlier we have it, but then I commented it. So you will see that user can add multiple languages if he wants to add it. Okay. And one more thing before going towards that, basically what we want is we want when user press submit on click of submit, we want to pass on this complete object to the server, correct? So somehow I have to pass this from here to the method. So how to do that? To do that, you have to write one method which is going to be ng submit. So internally Angular, hijack the submit action and fire the submit event on the form. Oh, sorry, not here, on the form tag. And you can call a submit method. Okay, and submit method, what you can pass on is maybe complete form, or if you just want to pass on the value, then that will be great. So generally keep a practice of passing form so that you can also do a lot of things in there. So I will show you. I just wrote a submit method in here and going to write a submit method over here as well. And we will also console the form and to get a feel of it, what exactly it have. So I'm going to have profile form in here, which is passed from the method, correct? Let's see what happens. So I just save the file. It will refresh automatically, and we'll see. When I try to submit the form, you got something which is ng form object, and you will eventually see that it has a different thing where one of the thing is value, and inside the value you will see that these values are exist. And why I said that you should pass the object, because eventually this form can be invalid, correct? If suppose the first name is not being passed, or something like this is there, and I can pass on the object. I just click on submit and I just got an updated object. Where you can see that since this is not valid form, you can easily check a invalid flag which is going to be true. And the flag, if the flag is invalid, you don't have to make a call to the server. And if it is valid, you can check either of this flag, invalid or valid, and based on that you can decide whether to make an ajax call or not, like in here. So similar, so the way I said, if it is valid, then make ajax post to server, and otherwise if you want to show some error, then do that. Okay. Okay, nice, correct. So one thing which you will observe is when we are writing template-driven form, most of the things have been done on the template. So that's why the name is template-driven form. Even though if you check about the validation, then also you will see that we are adding the validation via attribute. And suppose you have any complex validation, kind of asynchronous validation, like if you have a username somewhere here, and on type of it you want to check that username already exists or not. So this kind of validator can be also written, but for that you have to write a explicit directive with validator class implemented in it, and you have to extend the ng validator service with multi-true, and that way you can do that. So I'm not going to cover that because I have a lot to cover in here. So what else you can do is, we were coming back to the point where I was talking about the languages. So what is the languages? Basically, you can add a languages what you want. Right now it is hard coded. So I'm going to clear out this 1, 2, and we'll change it to model dot languages. Okay. And this way you can, similarly by having a languages in the this thing in the model, you can easily loop over it. Languages. Easily loop over these languages, and then you can have similar kind of controls in here, and you can play around it, and that will directly reflect inside the model of this JavaScript object. And similar similar way sorry, similar way inside your model as well as in similar way inside your form, correct? So let's jump onto the model driven part. Okay, so I'm just going to going to convert use or convert the same form in the template driven way or a model driven way. So I'm just going to jump on the main page and I'm going to click on model driven, and this is same form. I'm going to convert this form in model driven. Okay, I'm going to close this HTML. So that was a template driven because I think I have 15 minutes only and I have to cover model driven also. So I'm going to open the model driven HTML and component. This is similar. I'm going to wipe out everything. Okay. Just to mention, in model driven, it is like different way. You won't be mentioning much things on the UI side, maybe one or two directive, not much. And most of the thing will be controlled by a model. Model is nothing but your component class that will be taking care of your validation or whatever dynamic things you want. So in here, if you look at the HTML, okay, you will see that this is similar. Now we have to convert this into model driven form. So there are three things exist inside the model driven form, three classes. One is form control, then form group, and form array. Okay, so if you look at this form, as I said earlier, each form is known as a form control or form field. So whenever you want to create this field, you will be going to use form control. Okay, in suppose like if you have a bunch of form fields or form control that are going to stay together. So in this case we have this all the fields which are basically mentioning or representing a model of profile form. So this whole thing can be considered as a form group. And in case of languages, you will see that as soon as I click on add, one language is going to be added, and this language will have two controls each. So internally, this language control can be a form control. Then these two controls together will be form group. And when we are click on add, we are going to append one more form group at the bottom. That means it is going to be form array. So basically, we have to create a form group which consists of all of this. So let's do that. So to do that, what you have to do is you have to import a first thing which can help you to create a form group, form array, or form group or form array. So this is going to be form builder. Okay, and you are going to create a form group. So that's why I defined one variable form profile form, which is a form group. So in here, I'm going to say profile form, which is going to be a form group. So there are multiple ways to do that. So I'm going to use this way, new form group. So I'm going to create a form group which will have various controls. What are those controls? I'm just for a quick thing, I will just copy that from template driven to here. Okay. So you just have to mention a JSON format where you can mention your all of the fields. Okay. So in here, what you did is you just mention first name, last name, and everything. So what is each field represent? It is form control, correct? Because form group is a collection of form control. So mention the default value of it. I'm going to just say blank value. Similarly, I am going to have it for other things as well. Okay. And we are going to look at this languages phenomenon at the end. So for now, just have this have it like this. And on HTML, we haven't did anything as of now. So what we have to do is we have to use this form group on the model driven form. So what you have to do, like wherever you have mentioned the form element, just go there and just say form group directive. And what else you mention is the profile form object that you have created in here. So basically it has multiple controls. So I just did that. And then you have to say there are elements, form elements or form control that are present in here. To locate them, you can use form control name directive directly, which will make sure that they will be used correctly from the form control, I can say. So I'm going to paste it on each field quickly. Okay, so there are so many fields, and I'm going to comment out this languages part so that we will cover it at the end. So, going to first name, then last name, then email. What else? Address, address one or two. I said one, so one. City, state, and postal code. So I just went onto the application and I'm saying that changes are getting reflected or not. I hope there should not be any error. The problem is with postal code. Oh, I did not mention code here because internally we have defined postal code name and I just used the wrong name. Okay, there is anything missing. Form field must contain a form control. Where is it happening? Let me see. A form field must control mat input somewhere. Oh, this is wrong somehow. That just the T was missing in the email. I don't know how. So it looks for when form field is there, it should have at least mat input so that it will consider it as a form group. Yeah, everything is working fine as of now. So let's see what happening. I think it is way simpler than the template driven form, correct? We have to mention less things. Let's see what exactly is there inside the form group. So the same way, I mean, internally, whatever forms you use, either it is my template driven or model driven, they internally look similar. There is no difference as such in terms of object of their each control. So if you look at this, you will see that you have succeeded with that with very little efforts. Okay. And what if you want to add a validation over it? So it is pretty simple. You don't have to do any changes like required attribute and all on the HTML side. You will be doing the changes on the model side. So if you want to add like this first name, this first name should be required, then just mention what your form control, what is the default value of, suppose default value of it is Pankaj, and what is the next parameter will be array, and that array will be array of validators. Okay, and there is also the third option, which is asynchronous validator, where you can mention the validator which will be making an ajax call, and depend on the response of that, it will decide either the field is valid or not. Okay, so as soon as I added the required validator in here, you will see that I should supposed to get an error for last name value when I submit the form. Let it get refreshed. Did I save it? Okay. Yeah. So as soon as I submit, see, you will see an error as in last name is not uh, is required and which is not valid. So similar way, we can cover one more scenario in here. So this is way of how to add a validation when you create a form. So there can be situation where you want to add a validation dynamically, correct? So take an example of this only. So on top there could be a button, and that button you have to mark all the field as in required. So I'm going to copy that button from the earlier HTML. Okay, and I'm going to paste it here. Okay, that was there. Okay, and better I can say call this mark all required method in here. And I want to make sure that all field becomes required. So what I can do that is I have to loop over all the form field method, but just by saying const control, and to get all the controls of your form, you can use a property inside it, which is control. So control will have all the form controls. Okay, and you can easily loop over this form control. So basically you are going to loop over it using for each, and what you will get is you will be having control in it, and for each control you will be doing something. Okay, what that will do. So this is going to be form control, correct? What you will do is you will just say, I want to add some validator. So in here you can get a method which is set validator. So what is set validator? It is saying validator. So that means it is the same array as that of what you are mentioning while defining it. Okay, so over here also you have to mention an array which is going to be validators dot required. We want to make all the fields as in required, correct? Why this is happening like this? I just have to say why the for each is not working, because abstract control has no. Okay, what does that mean? Oh, sorry. Let me see what happens. I think it is because of TypeScript only. Let me see. Has no signature, call signature. Okay. Form group dot controls. Okay. Let me hack it for controls. Missing is missing. Type any function. Okay. So I will just do it in this way now. Then, if it is not working, I will just say array.from so that it will at least work. Okay, it is not saying anything. Okay, so I will just try to show you. I don't know why TypeScript is not allowing me to do that, but quickly you can just add. Suppose I want to add the validator to the last field. So what I will do is I can get access to the last name field just by saying dot get. Then what field you want to access, and then I can set a validators over it. And suppose I just said uh, this field should be required, so I can directly do that using like this. Over here what I want to do is I was looping over all the control and going to set validators over it. I will see why it is not working. So for now just say like this. I just saved the thing, let it get refreshed. Okay, and as soon as I said this and I tried to submit the form, see this last name is required. And if I try to do a submit, okay, it is required anyways. Why? Because I know mistakenly last name is required. Okay, did I say required in here somewhere? Oh, sorry, this should not be here because we are dynamically adding it. So just to check. So Simon, how much time I have, Simon?
Pankaj, we are already 6 minutes
Okay,
about in
I
the
will
next
wrap.
session, so but it's totally fine.
Yeah, I will just wrap it in a 2 minutes. Okay. Yeah. So you can see that when I click on submit, initially don't provide any validation, but you can click on this and you will see that. Okay. Mark all field. Is it getting called? What is it? Model driven components. Okay. Yeah. And one more thing, which is catch. Once you do such kind of thing, you have to make sure that you are updating the validity of form. So this dot profile form dot update value or validity. Either update the value or validity of particular field or form should do. So what it makes sure is once you do any kind of dynamic changes in the form, it does not reflect directly. We have to explicitly say that. So this method helps in that situations. So just it got just refreshed, and once you say this, oh, does it get reflected on this? Okay, let me do the explicit way. Okay, submit it, then check. Okay, see, this is directly so you have to make sure that whatever field you are modifying, that should update the validity of it, not the form level, because it won't flow at the bottom of the each child component each child form control. So this way it will do. And one more thing which is now, I'm because of time I could not cover, the other part of this particular HTML was uh, this languages. This can be form control, and you can go in that way. So perhaps what I can do is I quickly revert my all the changes, and you can see that that form group is also here. Okay, let it get refresh. So basically this can be considered as a form group, and you can also dynamically add form group in the form group array dynamically, and that way also Angular shines a little bit there. So there are I know you must be confused like what should use, template driven or model driven. Basically it depends on case by case. So personally I love model driven because most of the things I do that are on the TS side, and I can easily test them out without including the HTML part of it. Okay, and last thing, which is only 1 minute I will touch. So the one of the current challenges with the Angular forms, you cannot have a types with it. So there is one library made by Nathaniel Bessel. So he have created one library which name is ng-knit form reactive forms. So and he has also written some schematics, like just by installing it and just by running one command, most of your form will be migrated to type form, where you would be doing less mistake. Like what TypeScript provide us to do is when you want to access any form level item, you might end up writing a wrong spell when you accessing the form values. So in here you can, what you can do is you can just provide an interface while you are declaring the form group, and when you are accessing it, you will see that TypeScript will catch an error at the runtime at the compile time only. You don't have to uh, go with just by checking the name here and there in the component.ts. So yeah, that's all what I have. I will share this repository and all on the GitHub or with Simon, and he will give that to you. Yeah.
That was an amazing session, Pankaj. I think last for 45, 50 minutes, you are someone who started with the first session and it was all code, no presentation. I think this is what the developers really need and expect from these virtual conferences. You are a true community guy, right? And
Yeah.
all that code. I think that's amazing session put all together, Pankaj. It was really nice to have you, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
All right, so the next session that we have is from Siddharth Ajmera. So, a quick introduction about Siddharth. Siddharth is a Google developer expert in Angular and web technology, currently based out in Sydney. And as a senior full stack JavaScript developer, he works on digital transformation engagement for his organization. Apart from his regular 9 to 5 job, he's an Angular instructor on Udemy and at PackPub. He writes articles and creates video content. You can find almost anywhere on the web if you just search for Sid at Ajmera. Let us now go ahead and invite our next speaker, Siddharth.
Hey,
Hi,
Stephen.
Siddharth. Welcome to the live show.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for this amazing introduction. That was great.
So, Siddharth, tell me where you're joining us from today, and what's time is your location now? Actually, I should ask that, right?
It's 10:42 p.m. right now.
Yeah, you're right now in Sydney.
Yep,
Yeah, so I think it's a little too late for you, right?
it's
And
okay.
but I really appreciate that you have taken your time and given for this virtual conference. I think everyone watching us today would really love to have your session. So next around, I think we'll have to little trim your time, right? Maybe around some 35 to 40 minutes, maybe 35 minutes. It's all yours, Siddharth. You can go ahead and maybe start sharing your screen.
Okay, sure thing.
There
All
you
right.
go.
Yep. Okay. Uh, Great. Then I guess I'll just start. All right. Let me also start my stopwatch. Perfect. Okay. So, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining in and listening to this talk. As you can see here, I'm going to talk about the present and the future of Angular with Ivy. Now, a lot of you might not know what Ivy is. A lot of you might already know what it is all about. But throughout this talk, I'll be touching upon a few major intricacies about Ivy, and so that by the end of this talk, hopefully, you will be able to better appreciate what the whole Angular team has done for us for the past 2 to 3 years or so. Let's first address the elephant in the room. What exactly is Ivy? So Ivy is the third generation of Angular's compilation and rendering pipeline. The first generation was called the template compiler, and the second generation was called the view engine. And there were some issues with both the template compiler and the view engine, and that's why the Angular team started to like make this whole journey of rewriting the whole compilation and rendering pipeline under the hood without even disrupting the whole developer experience. And so now that Ivy is out there, you still write the exact same code that you used to write in, let's say, Angular 6 or 7 or 8, but you still get quite a lot of things out of Ivy. So I did mention something related to the compilation and rendering pipeline. So what exactly is this pipeline all about? Well, you can think of the Angular part of your whole application as something that can be broken down into two major segments. So there's this ngc that is some sort of a command that triggers the Angular compiler, and the Angular compiler compiles your source files into some sort of a JavaScript that can eventually be rendered onto the browser. But this cannot really independently run on the browser because it depends on quite a lot of things that Angular has to offer to us as well in the form of these libraries that we use from Angular, like the Angular core and the Angular platform browser and other stuff like that. So these libraries are the things that are called the runtime, right? And so this is the whole pipeline that I'm talking about. Now in case of Ivy, the whole compiler as well as the runtime has been rewritten at the background, right? So the pipeline is responsible for doing quite a lot of things for us as developers so that we don't have to take care of all these things on our own. And these are a few things like transformation of Angular abstractions, because we as Angular developers are used to writing Angular code. Like we generally write TypeScript classes that are already decorated with these decorators like the ng module decorator, the component decorator, and stuff like that. But this is something that is not really running in the browser for us, right? What the browser actually runs is JavaScript, right? So this whole compilation and rendering pipeline is responsible for doing that. So it does things like creating and manipulating the DOM. It is responsible for data binding and change detection, and it is also responsible for creating CSS and animations, amongst other things. Now, Ivy is also an enabler, and you might have heard quite a lot about this particular statement in the past from a lot of the community members who are like really active in terms of Angular. So when the Angular team started to work on Ivy, they had quite a lot of design goals in mind, and it everything revolved around three major aspects. It was all about optimizability, incrementality, and flexibility. Now, as we already see that from the examples that we see out there, a lot of people have also shared uh, the things that they have noticed after they have migrated to Angular 10 or Angular 9, for instance, that their bundle size has now shrunk quite a bit, right? And so there are quite a lot of reasons for that. One such reason is that, let's say for instance, that this is somehow a visualization of what the rendering engine used to look like in the second generation of the compilation and rendering pipeline, that is the view engine. Now the view engine looked like this one giant big switch statement that used to traverse through the data structure that was generated by the compiler at that time, and then it had basically everything. So all the all the framework code that was supported by Angular was all present in here. But the way it was the way it was created, it was responsible for taking everything that was thrown to it, and then it had to somehow make sense of it and then render things to the DOM. But how it has changed is that now this whole big giant switch statement has now been broken down into smaller, more granular and more focused sets of functions that your compiled code calls. So all these smaller functions are grouped into some things that are called the IV instruction. So how that works is that this is the template code, for instance, right? So this is the code that gets generated by the compiler. Now, as you can see, this is not something that you write. This is something that the compiler makes sense out of the template or the component that you have written, and it translates it into something that looks like this. And you can see here that it makes calls to a few functions that are prefixed with this theta theta symbol. Now all these functions are these IV instructions, or these IV functions that I'm talking about. So the whole framework itself has now been broken down into smaller and more granular IV instructions like these. Now what it enables us to do is, our code gets compiled, and that it gets compiled into something that looks like this. And then whatever functions that the compiled code has that it is calling from the framework are only retained as a part of the final production bundle that gets generated, while the rest of the framework code gets easily tree shaked away. This is like a major breakthrough, because now the framework code itself can now be tree shaken away, and this is one of the factors which eventually results in smaller bundle sizes. And these are all these IV instructions that I was talking about. So every specific feature that we have in Angular, let's say if it is about SVGs or content projection or change detection or dependency injection, all these things are now represented by all these smaller and granular pieces of functions that are called the IV instructions. Okay, this is one part. The second part is that with IV, a lot of metadata files that used to get generated before IV, that is in case of the view engine, are now not really required. So this is like some sort of an experiment wherein I'm running the ngc, which is the Angular compiler, and I'm giving it the tsconfig. So it used to generate quite a lot of metadata files. Like as you can see here, it generates for the child component, for instance, it is generating the metadata.json, the ng factory file, the ng factory map file, the ng summary file, and all these different files of sorts. But with IV, everything the that the runtime needs in order to render a component and detect changes on that component at runtime are all present in just one file, and so we don't really need all these additional files of sorts. So this is how it looks like when you uh, run the ngc command in case of IV. So this can be considered as the exact same project, but with enable IV set to true. So IV is enabled in this case, and in this case, when you run ngc, which is the Angular compiler, then it just generates two files, which is the component.js file and the component.js.map file. And the component.js file has everything related to the change detection as well as rendering of this component that the Angular runtime actually needs in order to render that. This is great because now, since we don't really have all these metadata files, and the framework code itself can now be tree shaken away, it eventually results in smaller bundles, which is great, right? So I'm not making this up. This is something that is actually true, and here is an example of a source map explorer uh, view that you are seeing here, which is like a tree map size. So what we have done here is this that you see here was taken when the code was when an application which was running Angular 7 was compiled, and so the resultant bundle was of 3.42 MBs, right? But we migrated to Angular 10, and then we created that bundle again, and then that bundle now resultant was of 2.4 MBs, right? So this is like more than 1 MBs of 1 MBs of bundle size that has been removed away, right? Which is great, right? Because it eventually leads to smaller bundles, and then your application loads faster, it requires less bandwidth, and it offers a great user experience as such as well, right? Other thing is that now the locality that was initially implemented in a different way has now been changed as well. So this is like a code that was compiled in terms of the in terms of the view engine, and here it is an of a component that uses ngif structural directive. And with wherever we are referencing ngif, you'll also see references to things like the view container ref and the template ref. Now, the view container ref and template ref are the dependencies of ngif. So ngif requires the view container ref and template ref in order to generate itself. Now, what you see here is that the template that is using ngif also has some sort of an implementation detail leakage of ngif, right? So it still somehow references the view container ref and template ref, which is not so good, because now if something changes in the app component, even though something doesn't really change in the ngif structural directive, the Angular compiler will still have to compile or recompile that sort of files that might have changed, right? So it doesn't really have that sort of a guarantee that those files won't really change, because here, since we have this implementation detail leakage, we cannot really be certain at this point that nothing might have changed in ngif. So whenever anything used to change in a component that used ngif, for instance, it used to trigger some sort of a global compilation in order to make sure that all things are there in place. That's not really the case with Ivy, because now with Ivy, if we compile the same component, then it produces a file that looks something like this. Here as well, we are using ngif, but here we are not seeing those references to the view container ref or template ref, right? And now we only refer to any external dependency like ngif, for example, in this case, via a very clean public API. So what it means is, if the public API of ngif doesn't really change, the public API here can be considered as that d.ts file, if you think about it from a TypeScript sort of perspective. So if that d.ts file doesn't really change, then we can be sure that the specific building block in Angular might have not changed, and so it doesn't really need to recompile that specific thing. And so if something changes in the app component, then we only need to recompile or rebuild the app component, and the rest of the things can be taken care of by the previous compilation results that we have. So it results in faster compilations, faster bundle sizes, and faster test execution as well. And all of this happens because of these static fields that gets generated to the component, because like this, when we compile the app component, for instance, it attaches this theta cmp static field onto it, right? And so this is great, because now for every specific building block that we have in an Angular application, whenever we compile that specific building block, then it results in attaching one sort of a static field that basically defines everything that the runtime needs in order to, for instance, in case of a component, render that component and detect changes on that component at runtime. Now, all of this is great. I tried to cover most of the things that I wanted to talk about in case of why Ivy was rewritten, like why the whole template, why the whole compilation and rendering pipeline was rewritten. But I'm pretty sure that I walked through a lot of that quickly. But I'm talking a lot about that in one of a session tomorrow, so please do check that out. I'll be sharing the slide, and the link to that event is right here, so please do check that out. Now, coming back to the design goals, I've quickly talked about the optimizability and incrementality part of it, but this talk is mainly about the flexibility part of it, as to what Ivy brings to the table for us right now, and what it will be able to give us in the near future. So let's talk about that now. But before that, let me shortly introduce myself. My name is Siddharth Ajmera, and I'm a full stack JavaScript developer based out in Sydney, Australia. I'm also a Google developer expert for Angular. I write tech articles from time to time on publications like indepth.dev, and I'm an instructor of Angular and Firebase on platforms like PackPub and Udemy. And just in case you might want to reach out to me, here's my Twitter handle right here. So yeah, come say hi. All right. Now I have broken down this whole talk into two major segments. One talks about the present and one talks about the future. Now I don't really have a lot of time right now, so I'll probably be focusing more towards the future side, and I'll just be representing the one of the aspects about the present of what Ivy brings to the table. So I'll be doing this with the help of an example, that is lazily loading components. So before Ivy came into the picture, we could only lazily load modules, right? So whatever we wanted to load lazily on demand as a separate chunk, we used to use the load children and then use routing somehow in order to load that specific thing lazily. But that was eventually a module, right? What if I just wanted to load a component lazily? Well, that is something that is now possible. So let's see how that can happen. So I have a very simple application out here, and in this application I'm just going to lazily load a GIF component that I have here. Now how this is going to be lazily loaded is that if you see the app module, I don't really have that GIF component added to the declarations array. So it means that this particular component is not registered on the app module. So the app module doesn't really have any prior meaning of the GIF component as such. Right. So how exactly do I load it dynamically and on demand? So I just have a button over here, and I've binded to the click event on that button, and it calls a method called load GIF lazily. And then there is also a div here. This div acts as a host for the component that is going to be loaded dynamically. So I have a template variable here that's called host for lazy component. And then I'm referring to this div via this template variable using the view child decorator. So that's the view child decorator right here. And here is that name of the template variable. And for the view child, I can also pass in an optional second argument, which is this configuration object that we have here. Here I'm passing the read property as view container ref, because from this template variable, I want to read the view container ref. Now I need the view container ref because I'll be using it to dynamically load the component. And then I'm also using a static of true, because that's something that you use if you want to work with some things that you want to get evaluated at runtime, right? So this is what we do. We refer to that host element using the view container ref. We read the view container ref, and then we set it to a property on my app component. The name of that property is vcref. Great. Now let's see what's happening once the user clicks on the button. So once the user clicks on the button, it calls the load GIF lazily method. Let me just open this side by side so that it's a bit more understandable. Okay, so what I'm doing here is in the load GIF lazily method right here, it is an async method because inside I'm calling a dynamic import statement to the GIF component. Now the GIF component is present right here on the exact same parallel path, which is this. So I will be using the dynamic import statement, which is going to return to me a promise. Right now, in order to unwrap that promise, I'm using the await syntax, and that's why I had to specify the method as an async method. Great. So this is going to return to me the JavaScript module for the GIF component, out of which I'm destructuring out the GIF component. And once I have the GIF component, then I can pass it to the resolve component factory method of the component factory resolver. Now the component factory resolver is something that I've here injected as a dependency inside the constructor. So I have the component factory resolver here, and I'm calling the resolve component factory on it and passing it the GIF component. This gives me the component factory. So this is the factory that I receive. Now, this factory is something that I'll be passing to the view container refs create component method. So we can call the create component method on the view container ref and then pass it a factory, and that eventually is going to return to us an object inside which we will have a property named instance, which will refer to that component instance that it has created. And I'm aliasing that component instance to a property named component instance. And then on that, I can supply the GIF source as an input property, because this GIF component right here also has this input property, which is GIF source. So this is the app component. I'm supplying the GIF source to it once I have the component instance. And with that, let's see what happens. So let me just open this. Um, okay. Yeah, I was here. Okay, great. So let me just reload this application. And since I'll be loading this particular component on demand and lazily, it shouldn't be a part of my main bundle anyways, right? Because I have not specified it or registered it on my app module. I have not specified it as a part of the declarations array anyways. So that's why, right? So since I'm using a dynamic import statement, this will be created as a separate chunk by Webpack. So uh, this is something that will then be loaded via this dynamic import statement that I have here. And so you will be seeing a network call that goes on as soon as I click on the button. So let's click on the button. You will see a call was made to the GIF component, and here we have the JavaScript for the GIF component. And as soon as that GIF component is retrieved, then this whole component factory resolver thing and the view container refs create component thing kicks in and eventually returns to us a component instance. And then that component instance is something that is hosted on the host for lazy component right here. So that's what I'm seeing here on the screen, right? This was not really possible prior to Ivy with Angular 8, for instance, if it was running the Vue engine, but it is now possible with Ivy. Great. So this is only one of the examples that I can show for the present. Uh, let's now talk about the future. So the future as well is something that I'll be demonstrating with a few examples. But before talking about anything, I just want to highlight one thing. That one thing is that a lot of developers out there find Angular to have a very steep learning curve, because uh, Angular has quite a lot of concepts, to be honest, right? Angular has things like modules, it has components, it has directives, pipes, a lot of moving parts, a lot of building blocks, a lot of things to capture and acquire before you can even render a component as such, right? So that kind of feels intimidating to a lot of developers who are like really new to Angular. And so this is something that probably the Angular team is trying to fix. And so whatever I'll be demonstrating from this point on might basically blow your mind if you have not seen that prior to this talk. So but before that, I need to focus, or I need to highlight one thing. That one thing is that Angular modules are linchpins to Angular applications. What I mean by this is that Angular modules take care of a lot of work that goes on or happens in the background without even us knowing about it. So Angular module takes care of a lot of things like dependency injection and change detection and stuff like that, right? But um, if let's say that we are able to successfully render a component without even using Angular module, then these are a few things that probably won't be happening by default, right? So these are a few things that we will have to take care of on our own. And so with that, let's start with the first example, wherein I will be rendering an Angular component from scratch without using an Angular module. So how exactly do we do that? Well, here we have an Angular application, and as you can see inside this Angular application, there are quite a lot of files out here, right? There is this app.module file, and then it all starts with this main.ts file, which essentially is being referred to inside this angular.json file. And there are basically a lot of files, right? But what if you just want to load one component, right? I mean, you wouldn't really need all these things if you just wanted to load, let's say, let's say a heading tag and a button, and uh, something might change in that heading once you click on that button, right? So how exactly can we achieve such a scenario? Well, this is something that can be done with this. So here is one such example. Let me just make this full screen. Yeah. Okay, great. So I'm using stack blitz here because I really like stack blitz, and it's perfect for such use cases. So this is a very simple Angular application. I'll probably not call it an Angular application because it is just rendering one Angular component from scratch, but without using Angular modules. So just like a regular Angular application, you won't really see a lot of those different files like the app module.js, or sorry, app module.ts and angular.json and main.ts, right? There is just 4 files over here. There is an index.html file that just has an IV tag. Then there is a package.json, and this package.json looks like a regular package.json. It has a few dependencies. The main dependencies that I have here are Angular core, because that's the only thing that I need to depend on right now. uh, I'm still getting these things like rxjs, tslib, and zone.js, because these are peer dependencies to Angular core. So I'll probably not be able to get rid of them yet, right? But as you can see, here is only these 4 dependencies. But if you open up a regular Angular application, then you'll see a lot of these things, like a lot of these things that we generally don't even use, like animations, for instance. We don't really use animations in very simple applications. Anyways, so what exactly is the trick here? Now remember that in one of the previous examples that I said that whenever you compile an Angular component, the compiler adds a few static fields to the Angular component, and this component, these static fields are basically having all the necessary information that Angular runtime needs in order to render a component and detect changes on that component at runtime, right? So that's something that we are going to manually type in, and we are going to do that with the help of uh, a few IV instructions that I was talking about. So these IV instructions are a few functions that I can directly import from Angular core. Most of these functions are prefixed with this theta theta symbol. The reason for that is that Angular team wants to tell you that, okay, this is private in nature and you cannot really use it on production applications, on, like, you cannot use it on production, right? But still, if you are like thrill seekers and you just want to you know uh, make some experiments with it, then sure, go ahead. Anyways, so I'm importing a lot of these functions from Angular core, and then I have a very simple TypeScript class. This class is named IV component. It has a very simple name property and another simple toggle name method. But apart from these two uh, property and methods respectively, it also has 2 static fields. One of the static field is this theta FAC static field that we can see right here. Let me just zoom this in a bit more. So this theta FAC static field is a function that returns to us an instance of either a token, if we pass it a token, or an instance of the component class itself. So this is the theta FAC static field, right? And it is responsible for creating an instance of that component. And then there is also a theta CMP static field that is a result of calling the define component IV instruction. Now the define component is also something that I'm importing from Angular core. Now, this define component IV instruction is called with a JavaScript object, and this JavaScript object has a lot of things like the type and the selector and declarations and variables and constants. But let's not focus on all these right now. Let's purely focus on this template function. The template function is something that is called by the Angular runtime when it has to render this component, and it renders this component in 2 phases or 2 passes. uh, and that pass or phase is determined by the render flag. Now if the value of render flag is 1, then it can be considered that this is the initialization phase. And if the value is 2, then it can be considered as the change detection phase. So in the initialization phase, what happens is that it is calling a few functions right from Angular core. So element start, element end, for instance. All of these functions are imported from Angular core itself. So you can think of these calls to these specific IV instructions as something that you can see here in the comments. So element starts an element which is of type h1, but it is also stored at a 0th index. So Angular is somehow maintaining some sort of a data structure in the background, and it is storing these specific elements that it is creating on those specific indices. So this line creates an starts an h1 tag. Then this line, which is the text, which is the call to the text function or the text IV instruction, which is now stored at the first index on the data structure, is creating a name property. So here we will be seeing a name, and then element and ends that element, which is h1. So uh, these three function calls are going to eventually create a template that might look something like this. So we have an h1 tag, then there is a name property somehow rendered over here as text, and then the h1 tag ends. Let's move on and talk about the second thing, which is element start button. So here it's starting a button element now, but on that button element I can also listen to the click event. So this is how you will generally write a click event on a button in Angular, right? So this is how it looks like, and then on the click of that button I need to call the toggle name method that I'll be receiving from the context. Now the context is can be considered as the instance of this IV component class. So the instance would eventually have the name property and the toggle name method, because the name property and the toggle name method are something that I'm already having on this component class, these two, right? So yeah, we are binding to the click event on this button, and once the click happens, then we are calling the toggle name method. And then there is also a text node on that button. The value of the text node is change name. So this is how it looks like. So there's a button, there's a click event on it, and then the text that we see on the button is change name, and then there is element end, which ends the button tag. So end tag, like this, right? And then so this is the initialization phase wherein the whole template initializes, and this is a regular HTML markup that you generally are used to seeing, right? Then we have the second phase, which is the change detection phase, which is supplied by the render flag value 2. So what happens in this case is it starts with the 0th index and then it advances by 1. So from 0, it reaches to 1. Now on the first index, we have the name, right? So then what it will do is it will interpolate that text with something else. So it then calls the text interpolate one IV instruction. It will pass in a prefix, then the property that needs to be binded to, and then the suffix. And after that, it's going to end. So with all that in place, this is how the component gets rendered. So I see an h1 tag here, and then there is also a button, right? Now, uh, as we have binded to the click event on the button and we are calling the toggle name, which would eventually toggle the name property from this dot name, whatever it was, to IV or SID. Like it will oscillate between these two values. Great. So let me just click on the button. Uh, Now I'm clicking on the button, but the value is not getting changed. That's strange, right? Well, if you think about it, it's not so strange, because here when I said that Angular applications are Angular modules are linchpins to Angular applications, this is exactly what I meant, right? We are not really using Angular modules in order to create this or render this component onto the UI, right? And so a lot of things that we used to get out of the box using Angular modules is something that we won't be getting out of the box, and change detection is one such thing. So that's what's happening over here. I'm Let me just pull this onto a separate screen. Great. Yeah. So that's exactly what's happening here. We are actually calling the toggle name method, and the toggle name method is also being called, but and the change name method, sorry, the change name, the name property itself is also getting changed, but change detection is not getting triggered. And so in order to detect changes, there is also another IV instruction that we can use, and that is the mark dirty IV instruction. So I can call the mark dirty IV instruction. Uh, that's something that I'll be calling right after I have changed the name. So right here, and then I'll pass it the instance of this. And with that, as soon as I save that, let's click on the change name button again. And as you can see, the name changes now, right? And all of this is happening without Angular modules from scratch, right? Now, I mean, I can give you a moment to basically just visualize what just happened, and then you'll probably be able to appreciate how great this is. But I don't really have time, so I'll probably continue. Anyways, so this was the first example. Now there is a challenge with this particular example, though. The challenge here is that this is the sort of code that you're not really used to writing as Angular developers, right? You're not really used to call those specific IV instructions in order to render something. You are just used to typing in that HTML part so that it gets rendered, and then the TypeScript part of it, and everything is taken care of by Angular in the background, right? Now, I also said that this sort of a code is something that gets generated by Angular, right? So if you compile your Angular component, for instance, this is the sort of code that Angular component, the Angular compiler is going to generate for you. So if you think about it, the Angular compiler is going to attach these two static fields onto your TypeScript class if you pass this component through the Angular compiler, right? So how about we somehow improve the developer experience by doing just that, by leveraging the Angular compiler in order to actually compile this TypeScript class, so that we don't have to manually type in the theta FAC and the theta CMP static fields on the component class. So that's exactly what I'm doing in the second example. Now, this is almost similar to the first example right here. It's just that I'm not really typing in a lot of this boilerplate code anymore. So I'm not really importing a lot of these IV instructions. I'm just importing three IV instructions here. So one of them is the render component IV instruction, one of them is the compile component IV instruction, and the other one is the mark dirty. I shortly forgot one very minute detail here. How exactly is this component getting rendered? This component is getting rendered because of this call to the render component IV instruction. So to the render component IV instruction, we pass it the component class, or the compiled IV component class, right? I'm saying it compiled because this TypeScript class has these two static fields as well attached to it, right? So without these two static fields, we won't really be able to render this specific code right here. So uh, here we are passing it the IV component, and this IV component class already has those two static fields, and that's why we are able to see this getting rendered over here. Another thing is that I'm supplying a host of IV here. So host IV, and this IV is something that I've also specified in the index.html. So instead of IV, if let's say I change that to host and save, the application will break, right? And so I'll have to make that necessary change over here as well in the host property. And once that is there in place, it should now work as expected, right? So yeah, so one thing that we now have is the render component IV instruction. And then we also have already seen the mark dirty IV instruction. But then this sort of boilerplate that we were writing for the theta FAC and the theta CMP is something that we don't want to do, and so we want to leverage the Angular compiler for that. And so I'll also have to include the Angular compiler as a dependency this time around. So I've added that as well. And with that, I'm doing a very simple thing here. I have this metadata object, and this metadata object might look similar to the sort of metadata object that you pass to the at component decorator, right? So it has a selector property, and then it has a template property, and then this template property has a value which is like an h1 tag, a button tag, and a very simple link. And I'm already passing it to the add component decorator as the metadata, and this already has these two, this property and this method, like the exact same example that we had in the previous one, which is this. It's just that this example right here doesn't have these two static fields like the theta FAC and the theta CMP. So this time around, we are going to rely on the compile component IV instruction in order to attach these two static fields onto the IV component class. So that's exactly what this theta compile component IV instruction is going to do. And once that is done, those two static fields, which is the theta FAC and theta CMP, will now get attached to the IV component class. And with that, I can then simply call the render component IV instruction, pass it that class with the attached static fields, supply a host, and everything gets sorted. Now, if you also want to like actually see if these static fields are applied by the by running the compiler, then you can open this application in a new tab, and then I have also placed breakpoints over here. So one breakpoint is placed before the compilation, and the other breakpoint is placed after the compilation, as you can see right here. Let me just move this down. Yeah, okay. We can also maybe increase the font size. Yeah, so this console log is before the compilation, and this one is after the compilation. Now let's see what happens if I reload the application. So let's reload, and yeah, it first gets stuck on the first breakpoint, which is before the compilation. Now before the compilation, if I type in IV component and press a dot, then you won't really see the theta FAC and the theta CMP static fields in there. Now even if I manually type in the theta CMP and press enter, you'll see that it is undefined right now. I can do something similar for theta FAC static field. So both of them are undefined right now, right? Now let's step this through, and now the compile component IV instruction has been applied on the IV component class. So now if I type in IV component again, and then type in theta CMP, then I'll see a static field being attached to the IV component. The value of that static field is this object that you see right here. And something similar will happen if I type in theta FAC as well. This, right? So now with that, I can just type in my Angular application, my Angular component the way I'm used to typing in right now, and then I can just supply that IV component class to the compile component IV instruction, and also pass it some metadata, and then it will automatically attach those two static fields that are required for Angular runtime in order to render that component and detect changes on that component class at runtime. And then it will also and then once it attaches those two static fields, then I can simply add it to the render component IV instruction. Great. Now these are the two examples that we have seen. Now let's see how it can help us with simplifying the way we render components dynamically at runtime, right? So we'll be seeing another example wherein I will be loading an IV, a lazy IV component, for instance, right? So let me just open up the app component.html. And yeah, let's just comment this markup out, and let's uncomment this one. Great. So as you can see here, if I open up the application, then you'll see that it renders just a button that says load component lazily via render component. Now, clicking on that button calls this method, and this method is present right here, this one. And this is basically doing somewhat similar task as this previous method that we used, right? So in the previous case, we were depending on the resolve on the component factory resolver, and then we were calling the create component and all these specific methods, right? Now it's a bit difficult to remember these methods, first of all, and the second thing is it is also a bit more noisy as compared to the method that I'll be showing you right now. Now in the stack blitz example that we saw here, we saw that we can just use the render component iv instruction in order to render a component, right? So what if I just use the render component here as well? So I use the render component here, but I need the component class with those static fields attached to it, right? So I call the dynamic import statement once again, and then I supply the path right here. I destructure out the lazy iv component from there, and then I pass it. Then I pass that to the render component iv instruction, which is something that I've again imported from Angular core. And so with that, let's see what happens. So I click on the button, and then you'll also see a network request that would go on to fetch that iv component lazily, and then so this network request went out, and then it loaded this component. But this time around, we are not really relying on the component factory resolver or the view container ref in order to call those specific methods in order to render the component. This is one great aspect of it. Other great aspect of it is, Stephen, how much time do I have?
I think you have a couple of more minutes, Siddharth. Couple of more minutes, yeah.
Okay, okay, great. So yeah, the second thing that I wanted to highlight quickly is that let's say if you didn't really want a very long name for your selector or your host element, right? So right now I'm using a very long name for the host property to set it, but I can the beauty of this host property is that I can supply basically anything as a value of this host, and by anything I mean literally anything. So let's say that there is a host here. uh, the host is using the selector as anything here, right? So let's say that we can uh, expect that this lazy iv component also expects a host property which is of type string, and then that's exactly something that we are passing it as an argument here as well as here. So now on the ui you will see two buttons. Both these buttons are referring to two separate hosts, right? Another good thing is that if the component is loaded once, then it won't be loaded again, right? So that is also another aspect of it. Now I'm using two different host properties, but I will be able to still render the component with just this one function. I'll just have to specify the host as the host, which is coming in as an argument right here. So let's clear everything out. And as soon as I click on a button, a new request would go on, and it would fetch that lazy iv component on demand. And then since it has already been downloaded, if I click on the second button, a new request won't go. The same component that we have here would be leveraged in order to get it rendered onto the UI. So I click on the button, and then that gets rendered. Great. So far, so good. Now, uh, let's say that I open this component, and inside this component, I wanted to load some data that is coming in from uh, a call to a method that is present or exposed as a part of a service that I have injected as a dependency on this component. So what I mean by that is, let's say that there is a data service that I've injected on this component as a dependency, and then this data service is having a get data method that I'm calling, and then whatever data it is returning to me, I'm just logging it to the console. So let me just click on the button. Now the request went out, and the iv component was also loaded, but I couldn't really see that being rendered onto the ui, but I do see an error as well here. So let's open up this error. Maybe I'll just open it in the console, and it is saying that inject must be called from an injection context. Now it's saying inject, so it definitely has something to do with dependency injection. Now, the problem that we have here is that this specific component is being loaded dynamically at runtime, but then this doesn't really have a context of where exactly should it load a specific dependency from, right? It doesn't really have an injector of sorts. The great thing about the render component IV instruction that we have here is that as an argument, we can also supply to it an injector. I can pass it an injector, and this injector is also something that I can inject as a dependency. So I can do something like injector equals to this dot injector. And if I save this, go back to the application, and let's go to the network tab. Let's clear everything out. I'll click on the button. Now the component gets loaded. Another thing is that you will also see this network request going on to an API that loads in some data. And that data is also something that I've then logged onto the console right here, this one. So I should be able to see that data as well on the console, right? And yeah, so that's great. I have just demonstrated how we can dynamically load a component, and then how we can do things like dependency injection and lifecycle hooks. And lifecycle hooks is also something that can be used. So I'm not sure if I have much time, but yeah, this example does have that thing. So you'll be able to check that out at the end. Where exactly to from here? Well, into a world of Angular, then where you probably might not have to rely on Angular modules just in case you wanted to render a component, maybe, or you also might not have to rely on zones.js for dependency injection, because you have already seen that in this example we are not really importing this mark dirty from zone.js. We are relying on Angular core in order to uh, detect changes, right? So yeah, this is something that might be possible in the near future. Now, a lot of things I couldn't cover today in this session is something that I'll probably cover as a part of my 4-hour session that I'm taking tomorrow. So please do check that out. I'll be sharing a link to this on the slide right here. So yeah, please do check that out. And with that, thank you so much for listening, and you all have a great day ahead.
That was an amazing session, Siddharth. I think you not only need 4 hours, I think you need around 12 hours or maybe an entire conference just for all that knowledge that you have. Amazingly put, and I think there was some really amazing demos that you had, right? Ivy and with that Angular, I think viewers definitely loved it. We had a couple of questions. I think those questions are answered by the viewers itself, and I think we have very active viewers. I know it's a little too late for you at your place. I really appreciate on behalf of the entire
It's okay.
CSharpCorner community for coming today. Thank you so much, Siddharth. We will connect with you in other live shows and conferences. Thank you so much.
Sure thing, Stephen. Thank you so much for having me, and you have a great conference ahead.
Thank you. Thank
Bye.
you so much. Bye. Take care. All right. So moving on to the next speaker that we have, he is Santosh. Santosh is a Google Dev expert for Angular and an active contributor for Angular and NGRX. He writes for Angular in depth and mentors at .NET Tricks, and he's an organizer of Pune Tech Meetup. He's a creator of ng deploy package for Netifly and a part of Nest.js add-ons core team. He has already been a member of one of our past live shows, and we are really excited to have him once again. So let's please welcome our next speaker, Santosh Yadav. Hi, Santosh. Welcome to the C Sharp Corner Angular Virtual Conference. Why is that I can? You're muted, Santosh. Santosh, you're muted.
Hey Stephen, thanks for this that nice introduction. Before I can go ahead and talk about the stuffs, my daughter wants to introduce herself, so let's go ahead and do that first.
Okay, that's great. Hi, how are you?
Nice.
Nice. What's your name? What's your name?
Here.
Oh, what is that? Sorry, I couldn't get it. So why didn't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sorry, what is that?
I just couldn't get her name.
Hia, it's Hia. So she will introduce 1 second. Just yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, I am here, Yadav. Welcome to the Angular conference.
That's so
Yeah.
cool. That's so nice of her. Welcome, Santosh. You are a real community star. I was just looking at the comments. Guys have been really appreciate when you go ahead and reply them. Right.
Yeah.
I see some of the guys saying, "Hey, Santosh, I'm a big fan of yours." So we are really honored to have you, Santosh. I think we'll have to maybe do a little fast, like 20 to 25 or 30 minutes, right? So I think you'll be comfortable with that. So
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
next around 25 to 30 minutes, it's all you, Santosh. And
Yeah.
there you go.
Thank you. Hello everyone. My name is Santosh Yadav, and I'll be talking about optimizing an Angular application because recently I had to actually optimize a big enterprise-wide application. And so what are the things, different things which I did? I'll be talking about the same. Stephen, can you share my screen? I think I can just yeah, cool. Thanks a lot. So this is what I'll be talking about for like next 30 minutes. So it will be all about optimizing an Angular app. And my name is Santosh Yadav, and I'm one of the Google developer expert, as Stephen informed. I'm for Angular. I write for indep.dev. I'm also a mentor for .NET Tricks, and you can find me on social media. I'm pretty active on Twitter. I'm available on LinkedIn. You can follow me on GitHub as well, and it's raining heavily at my location right now. So, and you can also see more details about me on santoshadav.dev. Basically, I am. You can find my YouTube link, YouTube channel. You can find my Twitch link. Everything is available there. And also, in case there are some upcoming talks or upcoming shows, you will be able to get all the information on the same. Okay, so let's get started. So as I said, I'll be talking about optimizing an Angular application, and believe me, the struggle, the optimizing an app is not simple. It's a struggle. We struggle a lot, and I've been there. I have struggled, and then I have struggled a lot, and then I ended up doing some lot of POCs, and then how I can improve the application performance, how I can improve the bundle size which we had. So let's go through and see the different things which we did. So first, and the simplest thing to do is lazy loading. So in case you have a large application, of course you should be dividing it into different bundles, right, or different modules. That's what we do, right? We Whenever we create an application, we think about it as not a big application, but smaller parts or smaller features. For example, if I have related to employee, I will create an employee module. If I have created some feature related to products, I will create a products module. That's what we do. But are we doing a lazy loading? The answer in most of the cases may be no, because in my application it was not there. We tried to we tried to implement lazy loading, but we were struggling because we had around 40 modules. So remember, 40 modules, it means it was not a small application, and more than 150 components. So of course the struggle was real. So we ended up doing implementing lazy loading. So how lazy loading helps you, right? So this is what you get separate feature bundles. So in case I'm creating a separate module for employee, a separate module for your products, I'll get separate feature bundles, right? And you can load those bundles on demand. So it's up to you how you want to load it. We'll discuss about some strategies which are available. And another advantage of doing lazy loading is you get to serve less code on first serve. So you won't be actually giving the entire application or to your client on the first serve. So how you can actually implement lazy loading, of course that's something which I'm not going to talk about, but I'll show you the strategies which you can use. So once you do lazy loading, the another topic to discuss is how to lazy or how to load those bundles, right? As we said, in most of the cases, it is on demand loading. It means whenever a user goes to that link and clicks on the router or your router link, your bundles are downloaded. But you can actually avoid that. So there is something known as NGX quick link, which is created by Minko, and he's also managing that particular package. So you can actually attach the NGX quick link with your preloading strategy. And what NGX quick link does is it will check if your user is active, okay, and there is enough bandwidth to download these particular modules. So you don't have to wait till actually user goes to that particular router link and then clicks and then your module is downloaded. So it will not happen in that way. NGX quick link takes care of it. So in case your application is idle, it will be loaded in the background. Another option to do that is using guest parser. So guest parser, again, you have to just configure everything as a lazy loaded module. And this is a great solution in case you have Google Analytics, because guest parser takes data from Google Analytics and it tries to check if this particular module is being used frequently or not. If user is actually using that particular module, it will be lazy loaded. Otherwise, it won't be lazy loaded. It will be on demand loading. So prefer this guest parser in case or guest.js in case you have Google Analytics. First, NGX quick link is of course fine with any solution you have. But remember, in that case, all the modules, all the lazy loaded modules will be downloaded based on the bandwidth. But in case of guest.js, you will be actually saving some data, some bandwidth on your application. So that's the first way. Next, which I did for my application is I avoided using shared module. So we had two big shared module. One was material. So we had a material shared module, and I'm sure if you are an Angular developer, you might have done that. So we had a shared module for entire application and a different shared module for material. So what we did, how we resolved it. So this is so I wrote a blog post. So I'll just show you the link. So this is one of the most famous, or one of my most famous blog which I had written, and it is read by many developers as well. So I wrote it, stop using shared material module. So this is what I did in that particular blog post. I created few lazy loaded modules, okay, and I added shared module. So this was my application when I started. I created this application. It was around 392 KB. Then you can see I created a few components. I created a few modules, and they are not lazy loaded right now. And I added one shared module. This is how my shared module looks like. I'm sure if you are an Angular developer, you might have seen this code. So we have like starting from overlay module, CDK tree, and actually I don't blame the developers, because this is why this code exists, is because if I go to the Angular material and you click on StackBlitz link, which is available, you will see this code available. And of course, developers just take that code from StackBlitz link and add into their own application. But believe me, this is not a good solution to do. So when I did that, so after adding your component multiple modules, so I added two modules, and then I added a shared material module. Okay, so my bundle size went up to 639 KB. Okay, so it was like more 300 KB more. And then I decided to create lazy loaded modules. So I said, okay, now if it's 639 KB, let's go ahead and do lazy loading, as my first solution was, right? And then when I did that, actually my bundle size went up to 705 KB, because I was using that shared material module in my different modules. So even in my employee module, I was injecting that shared material module. Even in my department, I was using the same, but in department, or sorry, in employee, I was not using all the modules which is provided by material, right? So then I said, okay, now let's get rid of this shared material module and try to use only modules which I need. So I removed that shared module from my application, and then just use the modules from material which is required in employee and in department, in product. And this is where I ended up. So my bundle size got reduced from 705 to 664. So you can see I almost saved 40 KB. You may say, okay, this is a lot of effort for 40 kb. Remember, this is only two components which are talking about. But in case you have 40 modules, I mean, here we had just two modules, but remember, in my case, I had 40 modules and more than 150 components. So of course, in my application, the impact was huge. We ended up saving more than a MB. So this is what the first way is. Another thing, when I was doing all this optimization, I realized I should be able to check my component size as well, because but I was struggling. I mean, I had no idea how to do that. So I ended up watching the talk from Igor Minor from Angular team. He's a tech lead. So he introduced a new package which is known as Source Map Explorer. So I created one small package on top of it, which is known as ngx builders / analyze. So you can actually go ahead and add this into your application. You can just say ng add and ngx builders and / analyze, and then you can just run this particular command. So you can say ng run project name and analyze command, which will be added into your angular.json file. So let me just show you that code. Okay, so this is the application. I'll just run this command. I have already added it, and I'm just running ng run scss demo :analyze, and this will give you a nice representation on how many different modules you have, which module is responsible for how much bundle size and everything. And this is where I got one more interesting thing. So I'll just let me just run this. Okay, so what this package does is it will actually build your application in with source map enabled, and it will also not consider the budgets. So it will not consider in case you have specified any budgets, which we are which we are going to talk about next. And this is what it gives you. So you can see different files, different bundles. So let me just increase the font size. So it's should be visible now. So you can see whatever different bundles which we have in our application, it will give you all the bundles which are there. And here you can see my application. Angular is responsible for 165 kb in my application. Then we have something coming from IV. We have something coming from router. And similarly, we have something coming from RxJS. In case your application size is huge enough, you will be able to see SRC, because the first thing which it will show you is the largest bundles or largest bundle size which is available. So by using this tool, I was able to check that each of my component, remember, each of my component was around 90 kb. So I'm talking about 150 components, and each component is of size 90 kb. So I was really shocked, but why this is happening. So but at least I got some data. I got some data to work with. Then I realized, okay, now I have to go ahead and decrease this size, because 90 kb is of course really big for a single component, and we have 150 like that, but not all 50 had 90 kb. So I started working on it. So how I was able to figure out what's going wrong. So I always use budgets. Budgets are really useful. So we had something known as any component style in my application. So I realized my any component style, which is by default set to 6 kb and maximum error is 10 kb, was actually each component had minimum style of 60 kb. Remember, more than I think 60 into 10, right? So 10 times more than what maximum warning should be. So I realized, okay, now what is happening here? So we realized that we are using the custom theme for material, right? And we did a lot of things wrong. So before I'll discuss about it more, but let's go ahead and see how budgets helps. So there are multiple ways you can set the budget. So uh, there is something known as initial. So you can define the initial size of your app. So for example, let's say you have your main bundle size of around 100 kb, and adding polyfills and other styles, it goes to 150 kb, right? So you will set your initial app size to be 150 kb. Now how it helps, so in case someone does something wrong, your application bundle size will increase. So if there is a sudden increase, for example, it goes from 150 kb to 200 kb, that's a red flag. So you should be able to see why that's 50 kb increase is there. So this is initial. Then you have something known as all script. So it says, okay, the size of all script should not increase. So if you are wondering what are the different scripts, you in angular.json you specify the scripts. You specify the scripts array. So all the combined script size should not increase this particular size. Then you have all. So you can specify the entire app. For example, if you have some standard within your organization that my app size should not go beyond 200 kb, right? So I can just go ahead and say, okay, my app should not actually increase 200 kb benchmark. So I'll always throw an exception whenever it goes beyond 200 kb. And we have something known as any component style, which will tell you, okay, if there is any problem, or your styling is actually increasing the budget which we have set. For example, in my application, it was when we configured it, I set it to 6 kb, but I realized that, okay, for most of the component, it's more than 60 kb. Then you can say any script. So any script size, it means the size of any one script should not increase. For example, if I have specified, okay, any script of 10 kb, and I have 10 different scripts specified, each of them should not actually be more than 10 kb. Then we have any. So it is applied for all the files. Any file should not increase. So how we did that, how you actually improved the SCSS one. So I wrote another blog post. This is like 7-minute read, where I did some experiment around something known as BEM, block elements model. And I ended up reducing my application size by more than 150, 1.5 MB. So I'll show you some stats. Okay, so I believe showing stats is much more useful. So I'll show you the prod build. So this is what we started with. Okay, so we had around 8.44 MB of initial bundle size, and it was we had no lazy loaded module. We had all of shared module, everything, right? So from this, we actually went on to achieve this one. So you can see now I have different modules, but my entire app size is now 6.48 MB. But see my the initial bundle size. So if you see the initial bundle size, it's around main bundle is 3.65 MB, which is way less as compared to what we had earlier, where we were loading 8 MB of data. And then my runtime and common JS plus polyfills. So if I combine everything, it was not more than 3.8 MB. So from 8 MB to 3.8 MB, this is what we came onto. And similarly, my lazy loaded bundle chunks, which were like, if you see the biggest bundle size which I had was this 622 KB. But previously, was it 622 KB? No. So before this is before I did the SCSS optimization. You can read the blog in more to get more details how I did that. So you can see my biggest bundle size was actually 1 MB. So I reduced the bundle size from 1 MB to 660 KB by using that styling technique. Plus, we did a lot of optimization where we removed all the shared modules and ended up using each component should have its own module. So that's what approach we took. And there is already one principle called scam principle written by one of the community member Lars. So he wrote about scam, where he says that you should use single component and module. So every component should have their own module, and we should be able to define where I want to use what. So this is this blog post. You can go through it, and then I'll be interested to see your feedbacks on social media if it helped you to reduce your bundle size. And the next thing, there is also one very small thing. This is something which doesn't require a lot of code changes, is to avoid using ES modules. So we had something known as Lodash and Deep Dash. We were using the ES modules for both. So what we ended up doing is we removed the ES modules, and then we moved on to the we earlier it was we moved on to ES modules. So we were using Lodash and Moments, not Moment, but we were using Deep Dash. So we removed Lodash with Lodash ES, Similarly, for deep dash, we have something called known as deep dash ES. So we actually did that as well, and it also helped us to reduce our bundle size, because when you use low dash ES, it actually only adds the bundle size, or the packages or the functions which you are using. For example, if I'm using one function from load.es, I will get the that particular function in my final bundle size. But if I'm including entire lodash, it's like you are including the entire library, and it will be your part of your bundle final bundle size. How I realize that? Of course, using the same tool. So you can actually go ahead and use that. So avoid using common JS modules in Angular 10. The good thing is, in case you migrate to Angular 10, you will get warning. In case you are using Lodash or you are using Deep Dash, you will get a warning that, okay, you are trying to use common JS module. Yeah, sorry for the interruption. There is heavy rain which is happening at in my city, so there was some just power failure. We are back now. Simon, can you just confirm? Are we back?
Yeah, I was just going to walk in and say, hey, where you are? I don't know any Angular. I cannot take the session from there. So definitely we
Sorry.
are live.
Yeah, okay, we are live. Oh, thanks. Okay, so in Angular 10 you will get a warning whenever you try to use common JS modules, but in case you are actually using common JS module and you don't have any alternative, Angular has your back. So you can actually use something known as allowed common JS dependencies, and once you add this, you will actually those warnings will just disappear. It will just go away. Use CDN to serve the assets. A lot of developers, what they do is they add all the images to your assets folder, right? I mean, of course, that's the most easiest thing to do, but I would suggest go ahead and use CDN. CDN, of course, in case you are using CDN, you have low network latency, it is high availability and better analytics. You will be able to see from where the people are trying to access your website, and it decreases the server load. So you are not going to serve like 1 MB of image from your server. It is deployed on CDN, and CDN will take care, and it will just try to serve the image from the nearest location, right? This is what happens in CDN. A lot of developers do this, so they are not using the prod mode. So I'd suggest go ahead and check if you are using the prod mode to deploy or build your application. And in case you are using prod build, the other thing which you can do is gzip minification. So gzip minification actually helps you a lot. Let me show you one of the stats again, where we are actually using gzip minification, and our bundle size is gzipped. So this is not the latest one, but I think it is taking a lot of time. Okay, so it is taking a lot of time to load that particular image. So just to give you an idea, once I you have seen my application size, right? So it's around 6.48 MB. But am I serving 6.48 MB to the user? Of course, I'm not. So we are using a server where zip minification is enabled, and the final bundle size which we are serving is 648 KB. So remember, 648 6.48 MB, and that's the entire application size, and the one which we are serving is less than 900 KB, 900 or 800 KB. That's what we are serving to the user using gzip minification. So gzip minification is something which you cannot do. You have to look for a server which actually does that for you. For example, if I'm using Netlify to deploy it, Netlify already takes care of gzip minification. I don't have to do anything else, and it is provided by your server. So you just have to check if it is enabled or not. And I think, just a second. Yeah, that's all about it, because this was my own experience which I had during optimizing my Angular application, and that's what I wanted to share here. So thank you very much for listening to my talk.
That's great, Santosh. I think you shared a bunch of best practice that one should have in building a Angular project, especially during the broad time, right? One
Yeah.
quick question: which is your favorite CDN? I mean, I use Supersonic. Which CDN do you use?
So I use Netlify to deploy my entire application. So Netlify has your it actually minifies your images. It optimizes your images. Everything is taken care by Netlify. So I don't have to look anything else.
Okay, so the Netlify is easy even with your Angular application. It doesn't have to do anything. There's all good to go, right?
No. Exactly. You just need to deploy the application. You can actually not only for Angular, you can deploy any static application in case you have,
Okay.
and that's it. Everything will be taken care by Netlify.
That's great, Santosh. Thank you for your time. I love your background, right? It's filled with the conference, very creative. That was an amazing session to put together. Thank you so much for your time. It's an honor for us to have you today. And we'll see you in the next conference. Until then, enjoy your dinner time, I think so, or maybe some
Yeah.
snacks.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Stephen, and thank you everyone. In case you have any questions, you know my social media handles. You can always connect and ask questions.
Yeah, great. And if you want to connect with him, then he also does live shows. Talk with Santosh Yadav
Yeah, Tech
on you.
Talks with Santosh, which I recently started, so you can always come and join us.
Great. Thank you, Santosh. We'll catch you at another conference or at the live show. Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Take care.
Bye, bye, everyone.
All right. So that was by Santosh. Our next speaker is Minko. Minko is an engineer in the Angular team at Google. He loves to transform abstract theoretical computer science concepts into robust industrial solutions. Minko is working on tools for static code analysis and development productivity. Before joining Google, he co-founded and was the CTO of Rhyme.com, which in 2019 joined Coursera, which is pretty interesting. Let us now go ahead and invite our next speaker, Minko himself. Hi, Minko. Welcome to the conference.
Hi.
So,
Great to be here.
So tell us how you are. We are joining us from today, and how's the day?
I'm actually currently in Europe, so I was able to fly back home just before like all the entire lockdown happened. So I'm working remotely in a little bit. It's super hot here, so I'm struggling with the heat. But aside from that, it's a beautiful day. So
Great. So
really,
are you which city? I think are you in Germany maybe, or someone's joining us from Germany?
currently I'm in Bulgaria, in Sofia.
Well, that's great, and I think lucky time to go back to home, right? You got the flight at the right time.
Yeah.
Right. So, Minko, our next 45 minutes is all yours. You can go ahead and start sharing your screen, and I'll catch you towards the end of your session.
Sounds good.
There you go.
All right. All right. Okay. Yeah. Hello, everybody. My name is Minko Gechev, and I'm currently one of the leads of Angular Developer Relations. Today in this presentation, I would want to share with you what is the current state of Angular. This is going to be also kind of a theoretical discussion as well. We will be talking about the reasoning for some of the decisions that we have been making in Angular for a while actually, which could be considered quite different from where the rest of the ecosystem is. For example, we have been focused a lot on some static optimizations and static typing, like TypeScript, and many other such features, which are bringing some specific benefits when it comes down to development of Angular applications. Since I don't know how familiar you're all with Angular, I want to give you a very high-level overview on what we have been building actually in our team. Of course, we have a framework, right? We have Angular Core. It provides you with a bunch of primitives that allow you to compose complicated user interfaces. You pretty much have here components which can receive certain inputs, and they can also emit outputs. And on top of that, when you decide that your source code wants to be more testable, you can take advantage of the Angular dependency injection that comes together with Angular framework. We also have advanced content projection and many other features, but in order to get started with Angular, all you need to understand is just the component model, how you can create a component and how you can compose components together. On top of that, if you have been using the framework, you probably know that we have a pretty powerful CLI. It actually has pretty wide adoption, not only inside of Angular, but also in other frameworks out there as well. Together with the CLI, we're building components, the Angular material implementation, as well as the Angular CDK. All of them help you to quickly bootstrap your application. Of course, we cannot provide all the different components out there that exist. You can take advantage of them from community projects, but we provide a pretty solid core that allow you to quickly bootstrap your application and know that these components work pretty well with the framework since they're developed by the same team. On top of that, we provide internet serialization. This is actually a module and a mechanism, in fact, that I would want us to discuss a bit further in this presentation, because this is probably a pretty unusual implementation of internet serialization across compared to like all other implementations that you might have been used to in other frameworks. So I would really want to spend some time discussing some of the reasoning of us behind it. This is going to be somewhere around the end of the presentation. We also have a language service, a router, animations, forms, and much more. And these are all maintained by the Angular team. So we have this right now. And to get here, well, it was a pretty long journey. I was lucky enough to be able to follow this journey, especially for Angular, since pretty much the beginning, when I wrote my first Angular book. And it was pretty exciting for me to observe this from the perspective of a third-party contributor, just contributing to a popular Google project. Now, later on, when I joined the team, I see how things are moving pretty fast. There are different requirements coming from the evolution of the web, coming from Angular engineers, and in general, coming from the requirements of the business so that we can efficiently ship new features of business applications, right? That's our goal at the end. So the Angular framework itself, it went through very different paths to be where it is today. I'm pretty happy and confident to share that right now, we're primarily focused on stability, making sure that we're addressing the issues that we have been collecting on GitHub recently. We have quite a few of them to take care of. We're also investing a lot in simplicity. As you can see, we're constantly trying to reduce the conceptual overheads of folks who are getting started with the framework. And also, as usually, we're focused on speed. We want to provide the best and fastest change detection out there. We want to make sure that we enable best practices such as component level code splitting, route level code splitting, efficient prefetching, and so much more. Of course, at the same time, we have opened the space for innovation. This doesn't mean that Angular is now a mature project that is not going to grow from now on. Of course, it is going to grow. I'm going to talk particularly about this and how we're going to communicate our roadmap with community a little bit later in this presentation. So currently we have over 2,000 projects inside of Google. To be exact, I believe the number is above 2,600. So for the past about 10 months, we got 600 new Google projects developed with Angular. And the current version of the framework is version 10. I'm going to talk about some of the features that version 10 introduced, but before that, let us discuss the theory behind the framework. I have mentioned this many times in many different presentations, but I'm really excited about compilers in general. I have this kind of academic interests in compilers and programming languages, so I really like to talk about the theoretical foundations, which are actually inspired to a big extent by the compiler design, which we made in Angular. Often I prefer to start talking about these theoretical foundations in a very practical context. You're probably all familiar with the trade-off of predictability versus flexibility. A good example is the daily schedule of someone. Imagine you have a very booked calendar where you have optimized your schedule up to a minute. You know exactly when you're going to wake up. You know exactly when you're going to prepare your coffee and take it. You know exactly when you're going for a workout, going to the office, and so on and so forth. This schedule could be a little bit stressful for a human. Of course, for a computer, this doesn't really matter. If you utilize the resources well, the computer is not going to be stressed out by having a really well optimized and strict schedule. But for a human, it could, and both for humans and for computers, it could be really hard to introduce something new into the schedule, right? It's going to be really hard to introduce a new task since everything is already pre-booked. Your calendar is completely full. So you're very productive, but at the same time, not too flexible. Compared to flexibility, you can have your calendar completely empty. You might not be like doing absolutely anything, and you can be you could be potentially like improvising every next day with what your schedule is going to look like. And this way, you're very flexible, but potentially not too efficient. In the context of programming languages and frameworks, this trade-off is better known as static versus dynamic. Static usually refers to operations that are performed ahead of time, at build time, during compilation. And dynamic are resources or like tasks that are performed like just in time, in the browser, at runtime. We can put some programming languages on this axis so that we can give you a better like intuition on what static versus dynamic means. My guess is that you're familiar with some of these programming languages, for example, with Rust. Rust is a pretty popular programming language coming from Mozilla right now. It has a really powerful, but at the same time, really static and really strict type system, which doesn't allow us to do much. So if we don't follow the constraints set by the compiler, we will not be able to run our program at all because, well, it is not going to compile. But at the same time, this static and this like static behavior and strictness, it is helping for a very efficient memory management. On the other side of the spectrum, we have JavaScript. And JavaScript is a super dynamic language. With JavaScript, we don't really have to fight any compiler because we actually have zero compile time. But at the same time, we don't have any guarantees that our program is even going to run in the browser. We get some runtime errors, and if our program starts growing, we don't know if we're going to catch these runtime errors before shipping our program to production, right? So it could get quite tricky. We're sacrificing in this case like stability and static verification and knowing that our program is going to work in general in the browser for better and faster prototyping with JavaScript. TypeScript is somewhere in the middle. So with TypeScript, we have a good type system, which can help us prevent a lot of issues ahead of time. But at the same time, it is not constraining us much. It is not restricting us too much to be expressive and to be able to rapidly prototype new features. So I would say that TypeScript is really well positioned into this spectrum from like static to dynamic. Of course, this still depends on the purpose of the language. I'm not saying that TypeScript is better than Rust. It very highly depends on the use case that you have. For example, with Rust, you can build really efficient and low-level systems, which you cannot build with TypeScript nowadays. It is also very interesting that from static, you can very easily go to dynamic. Imagine we have a very statically well-typed TypeScript program. We have very explicit type annotations, and well, we're pretty confident that our program is going to run and is going to work properly at runtime. Well, it's going to be very easy to make it more dynamic. It's going to be very easy to just drop some of these type annotations and get rid of the constraints coming from the compiler and be able to start prototyping more like faster just by introducing new expressions with type any or so on and so forth. But starting with a very dynamic program with a JavaScript program, which has never been type checked before, it could be pretty tricky to make it static and to add TypeScript type annotations. Not that it is impossible, it is just going to cost us a lot of work. If we put some like more tangible features and associate them with static and dynamic, we can think about them the following way. For example, compile time optimizations is something that static systems can provide. You might have noticed this in Angular. We have these static HTML templates, which are in fact translated to JavaScript. And they're translatable to JavaScript because they're static and the compiler understands them ahead of time without having to execute the source code in the browser. So we can statically analyze the templates and very efficiently translate them to JavaScript instructions and make them really fast for execution. Angular, in fact, has been innovating a lot in this space in the past. If you're looking at the framework landscape, you can notice that Angular was probably the first framework to introduce ahead-of-time compilation. And you can see that this is now a common practice. And a lot of different folks found out that this is a quite powerful concept, right? Also, static systems allow us to have much better text editor and IDE support. You can, again, compare TypeScript versus JavaScript. The TypeScript's types annotations provide much more context to text editors and IDEs so that we can get good auto-completion. Strict type checking is something that I'm going to discuss just in a little bit so that I can give you kind of a tangible idea for the results that we're getting out of it. But on the other side, dynamic systems are not bad as well. Dynamic systems can allow us to perform very dynamic behavior. For example, we can even dynamically assemble the user interface. And the huge advantage of dynamic systems is that we don't have a build process there. So you can just put a bunch of scripts in the browser and everything is going to work. You don't really need to go through some kind of a build process that transforms your application to something else. So something that's just a conclusion that I reached out several years ago, and I'm sure that I'm not the first person who have reached out to this conclusion, is that it's much better to get your errors ahead of time during your build process instead of getting them at runtime when you have deployed your application and you have shipped it to your users, right? So, of course, the best possible scenario is if we write bug-free programs, right? I wasn't fortunate enough to be able to create a large application without having any issues in it. So if you are capable of doing this, you definitely don't need build systems. But if you're just like me, you probably can benefit from TypeScript's type checking and from static systems. So here is an example which actually points out how beneficial TypeScript could be in your day-to-day development process. And when I'm saying TypeScript, I'm not necessarily meaning only TypeScript, since in Angular we have type checking in templates as well. So a couple of folks from community and from academia and Microsoft, they did a survey. They pretty much looked at different GitHub projects that were developed with JavaScript. They looked at their issue trackers and they tried to just verify which one of these issues was going to be detectable by the TypeScript type system at build time. They found out that 15% of the bugs were going to be detectable at build time instead of runtime. So this means that these issues were never going to exist in the final product. So users would never have to go through the experience of hitting these issues. They would have never went through the experience to reporting them, and developers never had to go through the process of fixing them. Imagine how much time this is going to save in a large organization working on a complicated project. And this survey was done with TypeScript 2.0. So this is TypeScript 2.0. Now we are in TypeScript almost 4.0. It is coming in the next couple of weeks. It has much more powerful type system, and it helps us to catch many more issues ahead of time. So here is an example how static systems could be really powerful. I know that we usually associate dynamic with good, but I just want to show you a different perspective, how static could be helpful in letting you develop more high-quality products. All right, so talking about static and dynamic and putting them into the context of frameworks, Angular JS, this is the framework that Google released in 2009. It is very dynamic. It is on a very dynamic part of the spectrum. You can just take Angular, you can place it on a page, and you can start developing your program, you're not going to get any static verification by the build process. You're not going to get any type checking or whatsoever. But at the same time, you didn't have any build process. So you were able to prototype very quickly, and you didn't have to wait for your production build to complete, right? You were actually even able, if you want to, and if you want to live on the edge, pretty much develop your application in production environment. Why not? Angular version 2, however, started with a couple of things in mind. First thing was that static things and static checks are really useful. They provide better compile time optimizations, so they make the framework faster. They improve the text editor and IDE support, and also allow us to catch many more issues ahead of time. At the same time, the framework team also knew that if they start with a very dynamic framework, they would be really struggling to make it more static, because they're going to break a lot of projects. So what they did back then, when I wasn't part of the team, they just made Angular version 2 really static, really constrained. You weren't able to declare, you had constraints on how you can declare providers, let's say, in your engine modules. You had a lot of different constraints, which were probably not necessary at the beginning, but that was a pretty good shot to make the framework static at first, and from there grow it to a more dynamic solution, which provides better development experience. So that's what they did. For version 4, there was a rewrite of the compiler and the view and a rendering pipeline, which made Angular more dynamic. With Ivy, we did one more such rewrite as well. So Ivy was this big project that we worked on for over 2 years, I'll say. This project took us a lot of effort because it was a really large rewrite of the internals of the framework, and you can't imagine what tiny things that you would have never expected can have an impact on existing code bases have. So just like changing tiny internal piece in Angular can break hundreds of people or even thousands of projects. So that's why it took us quite some time to make sure that Angular version 9 with Ivy was completely backward compatible with Vue Engine, which was our previous compilation and rendering pipeline. So we made Angular more dynamic, but also not too dynamic, so that we cannot take care of all the compile time and static optimizations. Now let me talk to you what is happening in version 10. That was a pretty long, I would say, overview of different trade-offs that we have in software engineering. Now, version 10 is a pretty small release when you look at it. We are pretty much providing an opt-in strict mode, and we're also aiming to increase more the visibility of what we have been building in the team to community. Now, I would want to talk a little bit about the second part. I would want to actually acknowledge the pretty rough feedback that we have been receiving over the past couple of weeks. Some of it was more constructive and reasonable than the other, but we definitely listened. You might have also noticed that we didn't share any public direct response. This doesn't mean that we didn't acknowledge and listen to everything. We have been, in fact, listening for quite some time, and we have had a plan on how we can increase the community engagement and be more open towards what we have been developing at the Angular team. So in the next couple of weeks, we'll be sharing some efforts. For example, we have been working on, actually over the past 3 months or so, on making our roadmap more digestible, not only by us, but also by folks who are outside of the team, outside of Google, so that we can all understand where Angular is heading to. We have been also working on opening some of our engineering processes. We would want to involve more people into the technical decision-making around Angular, so that you can provide early feedback on design decisions and just help us to shape the future of Angular and in general of web together. Remembering back when I was not part of the team, looking at the design decisions and the design documents for Angular, these were some of my main resources that I was looking at, that I was reading through in order to understand the framework and even understand many other technical areas where I didn't have expertise back then. Looking at the Angular source code and looking at the Angular's design documents, I understood how compilers work. And from there, I got really passionate about them and started building my own programming languages. So I really think that this is opening this design process is going to be not only helpful for everyone to understand where Angular is heading to, but also to like grow together, like get ideas from one another and develop them. All right, now let us focus on the technical part of things. Now let us talk about Angular strict mode. The strict mode in Angular CLI version 10 is just a flag. It allows you to build applications with stricter configuration. This stricter configuration pretty much enables stricter type checking. So this helps you to catch more issues ahead of time. It enables stricter type checking for Angular templates as well. It makes the ECMAScript 5 support opt-in. This means that if you want to support Internet Explorer and you're in strict mode, you would have to enable this ES5 support. It also makes the CommonJS support opt-in. CommonJS is this module format that was originally developed for the server, for Node.js. And it got some traction for browser packages as well, which I wouldn't say is too reasonable. I'm going to show you an example of a CommonJS module and how it can pretty much ruin your performance completely in a little bit. But if you would want to use CommonJS modules in the strict mode of the Angular CLI, well, you would not be able to unless you opt in into using it. And also with strict mode, we're assuming that your application has reduced side effects. This is pretty much taking advantage of the side effect property in package.json, which Webpack understands and applies more aggressive tree shaking on top of your applications when it finds this property and the setting. So the strict mode is not something that we're going to enable out of nowhere. This is something that is going to stay in the Angular CLI for a bit. We just want to get your feedback. We want to see how strict mode works for everybody. And if people really love it and they see actually noticeable improvements in their day-to-day development processes in terms of fewer issues or faster applications, we would want to just enable it by default for everyone. But if you find out that it is dragging you back, it is making you less productive because you need to fight with different static checks, and you would want to have more dynamic behavior, we're going to just remove it completely from the Angular CLI and preserve the current compilation pipeline. So see, we still have this very interesting trade-off between static. This makes the Angular CLI more static with more compile time checks, and dynamic, where we have fewer such checks and potentially fewer optimizations ahead of time. Now, talking about more and stricter compile time type checking, I'm sure that in your mind you see something like this. A lot of folks, especially people who are just getting started with software engineering, they kind of find out that they fight with both JavaScript and TypeScript. They get different errors, some of them in the browser's console and others in their terminal, and it's hard to understand the benefits of all this. Well, I hope that I give you just like a slight hint that TypeScript giving you these errors just means that there is place for improvement in your program so that you can reduce some of the potential issues that can occur at runtime when you ship your application to production. Now, I would want to spend some time talking about CommonJS because this is a pretty interesting problem, and it again shows this trade-off static versus dynamic. Actually over 2 months ago now, yeah, I wrote this blog post about how CommonJS is making your bundles larger. I just wrote this blog post. This is a well-known fact. I didn't discover it, but the findings in this blog post were pretty interesting. You can find it on web.dev/CommonJS larger bundles. Let us look at some examples so that we can understand why CommonJS is in fact making your bundles smaller. Bundles larger. So here we have a JavaScript program. We have a utils.js module, which has a couple of public exports. So here you can see that we have an export of the add function. We're exporting subtract, multiply, divide, and max. It's interesting that we're importing max by by Lodash, and we're invoking it here. Just keep that in mind. At the same time, we have an index.js file. And in this index.js file, we're importing only the at function from utils, and we're invoking it. So here, now we can take this program and pass it to Webpack. Webpack is going to produce a single JavaScript file out of these two modules, and this single JavaScript file is going to be highly optimized. Webpack is going to do everything it can to optimize it so that it can be as small as possible to provide faster user experience for our end users. Once Webpack outputs this file, output.js, this file is going to be over 600 kilobytes. See, almost like more than half a megabyte. See the original source code. In the original source code, we just have a couple of functions. These are for sure less than 1 kilobyte, right? And the final bundle is over 600 kilobytes. That was crazy. The first time I saw it, I thought that I did something wrong. So I spent a couple of iterations profiling what Webpack does, looking at the module loading, looking at the Webpack reports, and so on and so forth, until I realized that, well, that's just how things are. Here we're importing maxby from Lodash, and since we're importing it with a CommonJS require, it is getting part, like the entire Lodash is getting part of our final bundle, because, well, Webpack just cannot optimize CommonJS modules. I'm going to tell you why just in a little bit. Now, when we translate this to ECMAScript modules instead, here, see, we are exporting the add, subtract, multiply, and divide functions as well. We're also exporting max and importing, again, maxby from Lodash, yes. Pretty much the same program, but instead of using CommonJS, we're using ECMAScript modules. The output, after we bundle this with Webpack, is going to be this. Pretty small, right? Pretty tiny. And depending on the configuration of the JavaScript optimizer cursor, this 1 plus 2 could be actually folded to 3. So you can get 2 bytes less. This is 40 bytes compared to 625 kilobytes, right? That's a massive difference. So you can see how a single CommonJS module can completely blow up your application size and make it much slower compared to just using ES modules. And the difference is only in this. See, only the utils modules is slightly different on how we are exporting things. And the interesting thing here is that it is again related to this trade-off static versus dynamic. It may not seem that CommonJS is much more dynamic, but look at this. Here we can export a function with a name that we're getting from local storage by touching the element in local storage associated with a random number that we have generated. So this is extremely dynamic. Pretty much Webpack at build time, it has no idea how to understand what is the module name, so that it can get rid of the export if we're not using it. This local storage get item information is something that is only available at runtime. So at build time, statically, we have no idea how to optimize it. This is just one example, but I also want to give you one more example, which is related to the Angular's internationalization. I have been hearing a lot of very mixed feedback about internationalization, and a lot of people have been asking for a runtime internationalization, which allows you to swap the language dynamically without refreshing the page. And originally, I thought that we just don't communicate the reasons why we have taken certain decisions on improving the internationalization with static analysis. So let me share why we're doing it right now. By using our internationalization, you would first compile your Angular application to JavaScript. Here, for all your internationalization markers, where we have specified the I18N attribute, we're going to add some specific other markers using our $localize service. Later on, for each one of your translation files, we're going to take your application and apply direct replacements to the source code. So we're going to replace these markers that we introduced with the actual strings associated with the particular translation that you're building your application with. So this means that with like 4 different translation files, you're going to come up with 4 different versions of your application. I want to address a couple of things here, first of all. So there were problems with our internationalization in version 8 and before, where we had to compile your application once for each individual language that you support. And this wasn't ideal for sure. This was taking a lot of time. Now we optimize this. So instead of compiling your application once for each language, now we're compiling it only once, and we're performing replacements depending on the language that you're targeting right now. Replacements are much faster than the original compilation. So that's why the build process now with like 100 different languages is not going to be so much different from the compilation process with one language, right? We're going to produce 100 different versions of your application as well, but we are no longer having to introduce like individual bindings for the different translations that you depend on, since we're going to replace these bindings with strings associated with the corresponding language. This is going to allow us to remove the runtime overhead associated with these bindings, since a binding means that Angular needs to perform checking there. Like Angular needs to verify whether the current value of the binding is different from the previous value, right? So this means that by performing this compile time I18N, we're making your application much faster compared to binding to the individual translations one by one. Also, we're making it much smaller because each binding is a JavaScript instruction. And this JavaScript instruction adds up, especially when your application grows. So you're going to have smaller application and faster at runtime just by performing such static optimizations. And the cost for this is pretty much zero. The cost is that it's going to be impossible in this case to change the language without refreshing the page. And well, to be honest, users are not usually changing from one language to another in a series just so that they can read your content in like all the different languages that you provide. So this is not a very common use case. You're giving up something small in order to add better performance to your application. So this is a way we implement internationalization. It is much different compared to what most other frameworks do right now. I'm not saying that this is not possible to achieve in other frameworks. This is just the decision that we took, and it is a result of the design that we have for Angular. Static templates allow us to perform static optimizations and produce faster applications. All right, that was pretty much everything I actually wanted to share with you today. I really hope that with this overview on static versus dynamic, I was able to point you to some of the motivation behind the technical decisions that we made in Angular. I'm also hoping that I gave you a little bit more visibility on what community processes that we're working on. For example, sharing our roadmap finally and requesting for comment for some of the technical decisions that we're making. If you have any feedback for my talk or for myself or for Angular, feel free to reach out on Twitter. I'm responding there pretty actively. I spend far too much time on Twitter. And I would also really love your feedback on mgv.io/talk about this presentation. Thank you.
That was an amazing session, Minko. Let me just go ahead and ask you the very first thing. How long it took you to make that presentation? Because that was really fantastic.
It is actually, I built it incrementally for different, over time it evolved.
Yeah, so you have been giving a lot of conferences and sessions, so you just compile it, and that's how you get the best presentation. Amazing session, Minko. We really appreciate your time. I, Stephen Simon, on behalf of entire CSharpCorner community and its millions of users, would like to thank you for your valuable time, and I really appreciate for what you're doing for the community. Thank you so much, Minko.
I also want to thank you for everything that you're doing for community. This presentation, this entire conference is super valuable for everyone. Like this knowledge sharing and allowing people to share the work that they have been doing is fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, Minko. Take care.
Bye-bye.
All right, so now let's move to the next speaker that we have is Nishu Goel. Nishu is an engineer who works on front-end technologies. She's a Google Dev expert in Angular and a Microsoft MVP. She's also a CSharpCorner MVP. She writes blog posts and code labs around the concept of Angular and web in general. She is also an author of the book Step by Step Angular Routing, and you can always find her on Twitter with the handle DeCosta Wilson. Let's invite the speaker now, Nishu Goel. Hi, Nishu. Welcome to the conference.
Hi, thank you so much. That was a great introduction, Stephen.
Yeah, I think, and
So yeah,
Nishu,
I'll
tell
just go
me.
ahead and start.
Yeah, I definitely see your screen, and thank you so much for joining us today. And I'll just share your screen, and then you can go ahead and start having your presentation.
Sure. Okay. So yeah, hi everyone. Hi again. Thank you very much for joining, and I am really excited to be presenting today. And I'm going to be talking about creating libraries in Angular and building and packaging your libraries, especially with Angular 10. You would see a little bit changes in the way your library would work, or the bundling of your library would work. So let's just jump right in and have a look at how to create Angular libraries. Okay, so as Stephen already introduced, a little bit about myself. I am an engineer and I work at the DataWorks. Most of my work revolves around the front-end technologies, Angular, React, and I am a Microsoft MVP and a Google developer expert in web. And I love to write code labs, blog posts around the basic concepts of Angular or web. So when we talk about libraries, right, the basic idea of creating it is about the concept of reusability. And if you're looking for a more standard definition of what libraries are, you would want to go into the programmatic definition of what libraries are. So when I was Googling what is a library as a technical definition, it gives you this standard definition. And it says that in programming, a collection of pre-compiled routines that a program can use is a library. Now, there's a lot of words there. So let's just break it down and understand what it really means and how it is helpful to us for our understanding of, why would we want to create a library using a framework, and why would a program want to use a library, right? And basically, what is the purpose? So it says it's a collection of pre-compiled routines. Now, this gives us a sense that, okay, there's some functionality that can be used repeatedly or maybe across your different projects, and it's pre-compiled. Like the functionality is working, and you can just export it and use it inside your maybe other applications. And so the program can use this pre-compiled routine, pre-compiled feature that is ready for you, and you can maybe share it with other, or just create it and use it in different programs or different projects of yours. Now, the takeaway from here can be that first, your library has some shareable code. You can share it across your projects or with your colleagues. Then it has the reusable functionality, which is obviously the basic idea of creating a functionality. Then the fourth point here says it would have a dedicated code for a feature. Now, for example, you want to implement a virtual scroll for your project. Now, this is a project that has many other functionalities, but then this particular functionality, which is virtual scroll, makes you think that you might need a similar functionality in many different projects of yours, and you don't want to keep it specific to a project. So you think that, okay, let me make it reusable. Let me build it in a way that it becomes reusable, and I should be able to use it in my next application or next project that I'm doing. That's where the concept of libraries start coming in. That's where you start thinking that, okay, what if I just create it reusable, put it somewhere maybe just for myself, or maybe an internal repository of your organization, Just put it there. Whenever you or anybody wants to use it, can just go ahead and use it. And I always use this example of my own way of working. So I used to work in a setup where we would, like, for example, there are 5 colleagues in our team, and all of us were working on different projects for different clients. Now, one person for a client would be working on it. Now, what we would do is to start an efficient way of working was we would build something, whatever component or functionality that we see can be reused. We would build it as a component or a library in itself, and then we would just use it and push it onto our internal repository. Now, for example, my next colleague who's working on any other project says that I'm working on a different framework project, and he wants to use the same functionality. He can definitely go ahead and use the different web components that I have created. Now, that's the thing with web components. If you're looking for using your functionality in different framework projects, you can go with custom elements, and we have Angular elements to do that within Angular, right? And if you're tools and components, then you would want to have it inside your Angular project, because you can export Angular libraries and use them only inside your Angular applications. So you can do that in that case. Now, when we understand that reusability is the main idea of creating and using libraries, this picture comes into my mind, and this is a very good example that was shared by just a minute. So where is my screen? Yeah. So this was a very good example that was shared in the stock Create and Publish Angular Libraries Like a Pro by Yuri. And in there, he used this picture, which is a very good representation of how our applications comprise of different JavaScript libraries or different Angular libraries, and all of the code is then assembled to create your whole application. And now, if you reflect and think about your own application, you would see that your application actually uses a lot of different libraries, right? Maybe it's just a regular JavaScript library, or maybe a different Angular library, right? So we, in our projects, use a lot of Angular libraries or JavaScript libraries in general. And then that makes me, come to the point of the use of library and how it really helps us. So this is the definition that makes justifies the use of library, kind of. So it says it's the smallest set of logically connected code. And as you can see, I've highlighted logically connected code here. And what it really means is that you would have one feature, one functionality in your library that you want to bundle together and use it as this small set of all the connected code, which is obviously logical enough because it has a purpose. It has this feature that you're trying to export, and this bundle is the thing that you can export and then give to your wherever, whether make it public to npm repository, or just give it to your colleague, or just keep it to yourself if you want to use it in different projects. So that is kind of the best use of library, when you're making the bundle very small and just very feature specific, and keeping it or sharing it with anyone. Now, there are different features that a library should have, and we just had Minko talk about Angular, right? So he, in a blog post, shared the different features of a library, and these are some of the features that I'll be talking about now. So he mentioned that a library should be platform independent. Now, what this means is that our library should not just work with our regular Angular project, but it should also work on the server side if you're working on Angular Universal, and it should also work with web workers. This was one feature of having a library. Then the other feature that a library should have is that it should be bundled and distributed. Now, we understand that well, that our library obviously should be bundled and it should be distributed across projects, or wherever you want to use it. It should be AOT compilation ready. Now, before AOT was by default, you had to make sure that your library is AOT compilation ready. But with the latest feature of Angular, you already have that, right? So your library always will be AOT compilation ready. And that's when you think that, okay, there are a lot of features, and how do we keep up with all of those when, for example, you are trying to create your own library? And for example, you are a newbie in, maybe you've been working with Angular, but then if you choose to create your own library, this might kind of disappoint you that, okay, there are a lot of features and I need to take care of each and every feature. And that's when you really think that, do I have a proper way of, deciding what format to use, what not to use, what is the best way to go about it, what is the exact architecture that I should use? And that's when Angular package format comes into picture. Now, the Angular team actually prepared a whole document, which is called the Angular package format. And this document it's kind of a guideline to share with you the recommended way of distributing your Angular packages. And if you look at the already existing Angular packages that you use on a regular basis, all of those are created and bundled and packaged as per the Angular package format. Now, it basically means that if you're using the Angular package format to create your own library, this would integrate seamlessly with your Angular application, and you would not have to, since it would follow all the guidelines of your Angular project or the way Angular libraries work. And some of the things that it suggests is that it would create the module definitions for you. It would keep your library AOT ready, and it would create the metadata file for the same. Then it would have the entry point file ready for you. You can obviously configure the entry point file that you have, and we'll look at that a bit later. And it would also create the typing files for you. Now, I've shared this link here in the same slide, which refers you to the Angular package format. And this is really interesting because this document takes you through all the different, file layouts and the design ways. So I've opened this document here actually. And if you look at it here, you can see that how, the file layout is shared, the different bundle formats are shared in here, whatever you would want to use. For example, it mentions all the different module formats that you would need that your library should, compile to. And there's one very interesting thing in this document, which, so if you see here, there's this excellent post mention of the post is called the cost of small modules. And you might be really interested in this if you're trying to understand more about the bundling of your library. So I would suggest to read this one. It would also talk about the flat bundles that you would create for your library and the regular bundles also. Moving on, finally, about creating your library, right? So now that we have understood the different features your library should have and the recommended way of creating a library, what is the file layout that you should follow, all of that, then finally, let's see what is the first step actually that you should take for creating your library. So first of all, you need to make sure that you inline all your styles and templates. Now, whenever you're creating a library and you want to keep a feature, and we mostly have features as per components, right? So let's say there's a module which contains many components, and all these components would have one HTML file, one styling file, then it would have a testing file and the TS file. And you would really want to inline all the styles and templates to make sure that the bundling of your component into the library when you're finally bundling your library is seamless. It's very easy for the compiler. And the next step after you have inlined all your templates and the styles is to pass it through the Angular compiler, which is NGC. Now, this is the point where the inlining of your templates is very important because you want the Angular compiler to just take it as a one file, which has the all the template for it, HTML for it. It has all the business logic for that and all the styles in there within that one TS file, which is for your component. When you compile it, it generates all the different bundles for your application, and these are the build formats. Now, the first bundle that it should create is the ESM 2015 bundle. Now, we also call it ES6 format. So that's the first kind of bundles that it would generate for you. The second bundle that it should generate for you is ESM5. And that is actually a combination of ES5 and the import-export statements from the ES6. So it's kind of a hybrid bundle format. And then there's this third bundle, the build format, which is the UMD format. Now, this universal module definition is actually a combination of CommonJS and AMD, which we used to use earlier. So there's a catch here, actually, which we'll talk about it a bit later. And we also should notice that when we are actually bundling our library, we also get to see some flat bundles. So when we are building our library and going through the demo, we'll see that the ESM5 bundle won't be there after you've switched to Angular 10. and that's deprecation because the down leveling of your library to ES5 happens after the build. So we'll look at that a bit later. Then you might be wondering that I talked about inlining the templates, I talked about compiling those, I talked about the different build formats. I mean, how, you might be totally disappointed about, creating your library, and you might be disheartened that, okay, do I just quit creating a library? What about my, your plan of creating a library? But then ng packager comes to rescue when you're actually, wanting to create your library, but then all of those tasks are, don't seem to be very easy. And ng packager is a project that was done by that was created by David, and it allows your libraries to be built and packaged using this single bundle, a single command. And what it basically does for you to make your task a whole lot easier is that it would create the libraries in the Angular package format. Isn't that the best thing ever? I mean, ng packager makes sure that all of your libraries, whenever you're creating, are created as per the Angular package format. So it follows all the different, whatever guidelines are given in the format document, and follows those to create your library. That's one. The second thing it would do is that it would also create all the different bundles for you, which is the ones that we discussed just before the slide, which is the ESM 2015 bundle, the ESM5 bundle, and the UMD. And the third very important thing is that it would also create type definition files for you. So we would not want to, have to separately install the types package, or you would also not want to, specify in environment.ts file, for example. So it would create the type definitions for you. It would create the metadata file, which is for ahead of time compilation, and the best, it would inline all the styles and templates for you. I mean, if you've not used the Angular CLI to inline your templates, or also if you don't want to manually, because who does that? You would definitely want to use the Angular ng packager to inline all the styles and templates. Now, since this does almost everything for our library to be created, this was actually adopted by the Angular CLI, and now it works under the hood, behind the hood, in the CLI, and CLI uses ng packager to create your library. And just like you see the all other commands to create any package, right? For example, ng generate component, ng generate module. Similarly, you can create your library using ng generate library and then the library name. And as we discussed before, the bundles that also will be created for you will be the flag bundles for your each of the bundles, ESM5 and ESM 2015. So if you see your bundles as FESM5, FESM 2015, these are the flag bundles with one file, whole code in one file. So that's the another important thing here. Now, if you remember a bit back, I was talking about configuring your ng packager entry file or the destination. Now, this is the place where you have actually defined what your entry file should be, and what is the, when you produce your, and when you build your library, what is the destination for that. So the entry file is usually of this name, public API.ts, and you can definitely configure that. And then you have the dist folder, which would have the library, the produced library for you. So that's the first step you can do. And if you look closely into the public API.ts file, it contains all the information of the things that you're trying to expose from your library, be it a module, be it a component, be it a service. So this is very important file because this is kind of the face of your library. This is how the library is interacting with the consuming application. So your public API tells the consuming application that, okay, this library has this module or this component, and you can just use it and get the functionality of this library. And the consuming application then, I'm just trying to show you very step by step as to when we come to the consuming application, you can just use the name of your library, and you can import whatever you were exporting from your public TS file. And then in your consuming application, you can simply use the module, and you can use the component which you obviously exported from your public API. And this you can use the ES6 import statement to do that. The next step to look at and to understand better is the ng packager way of working. So earlier, your library had one public API TS file, which looked something like this. You were exporting things from here. Then you had all the TS files, which are actually your the logic in your library, whatever library functionality you have. So those are all the TypeScript files. And then you have this package.json file, which is the information about your library. It can contain the name of your library, the version, and the peer dependencies. Now, peer dependencies basically tell the consuming application that this library is compatible with these versions of the dev dependencies, and it works really well if it is integrated with similar versions of the libraries or the packages. Then it goes through ng packages, and what it converts to is the Angular package format, right? And the different files that it creates is the d.ts files, which are the typing files that you need for your library. Then it creates the package.json file, which contains all the information of your produced library, of your built library. And then it creates all the different bundles, the bundles that we just discussed, ESM5, ESM 2015, and the UMD bundles. And like I told you already, that whenever you're trying to create your library, now that the CLI has ng packager working under the hood, you can simply use ng generate library and the library name. And what it basically does is that it runs the ng packager on the files that you have, and then build your library. I mean, this is for generating the library, obviously, and it would create the public API TS file with the configuration mentioned as entry file, which is public API TS, and so. Now, you might want to, understand the basic structure whenever you're creating your library. So first off, you don't really need to create, an Angular application the general way we do that, the regular way we do that. So if you say ng new application, it just creates the application for you, right? So if you want to just create the workspace, the Angular workspace, but not really have an application, because what you're trying to do is just to create a library, right? So you would just say ng new, the name of your application, and then you can just pass the flag create application equals to false. This would create the workspace for you with almost nothing there related to your code, and just contain the basic configuration files. And once you have that done, the next step for you should be to create the library, right? Because inside that workspace, currently you don't have anything, but you want to have a library. So the next step for you would be to create a library using the same command, ng generate library. So you can use the value as ngg library as the name of the library. And then as you can see, it is creating inside the projects folder with the name of the library and then the different files inside the library. And once that is done, you would see something like this. So earlier, before you actually created a library, there was just a workspace with node modules and all the other files like gitignore, angular.json, package.json, without anything related to the project. But when you created a library, CLI created a project folder for you, inside which it library for you with the name that you decided for your library. And as you can see, there's one more package.json here. This is not the root package.json, that is different. And then there's other package.json, which is specific to your library, which contains your library information. Like we discussed, it would have the name, the version, and it would have the peer dependencies and similar such fields. So the important thing here to notice is that inside the root package.json, not in the library package.json, but in the root package.json, you need to create, you need to finally build your library, right? For example, at this step, you have created your library and you have all the code written for whatever functionality or whatever feature you are wanting to have in your library. Let's keep it simple for this illustration. And let's say the library feature that we have is just that it should say on the browser that my library works, for example, right? So in that case, the next step for you should be to be able to build your library, because you have the logic complete for that. So to build that, you have this script. You can create any script and it should say ng build and then the name of your library. In my case, the name of my library is technique lib, as you see here. So I just use ng build and technique lib. And I would do that inside the root package.json because, I want to create a dist folder for my library, which will contain the produced library. And if you see here, what I do here is I'm trying to run the build of my library. And once I do that, there is some quite important information that we should look at. The first says that we should not publish IB libraries to NPM repositories, and you can read more about that here. Then As you can see, the first thing that it refers to is the entry point of the library, which is the public API DS file. Then it goes to the compilation step, and it goes to the different, the different dependencies which are there. Finally, it would start bundling. As you can see here, it's creating the 2015 bundle, the UMD bundle, and it's finally writing the metadata file that is required for your library. And finally, it shows you that earlier the library was in project technique lib, and it has finally built to a package inside the dist folder, and your library is produced inside that. So this is how it looks now. You have this dist folder inside which you have your library generated, and you can see inside the bundles folder you would have all the UMD bundles. Then you have the 2015 bundle, but like we talked before, there's no ESM5 bundle. Why is that so? Because this illustration is of Angular 10, right? I'm using Angular 10 version, and we don't have ESM5 here, because like I said, down leveling to ES5 would be done at the end of the build process. So either you down level your project to ES5, and then only you can see the other bundles. Then you might now be confused that there are so many package.json files. There was one at the root folder, there was one at the library level, and then there's one at the dist level, which is the final third package.json file. Now, it's very important to understand that first package.json inside your application was the root package.json. The second was the library specific, which contains the library information. And the third package.json is actually for your produced library, which contains all the information of your finally produced library, which you'll be publishing to NPM or using it for your as a package for your other applications locally. So when you understand that, the final step for you should be to pack your libraries, because you have generated a library, you've written the code for required for whatever feature you want in your library. The next step was to build your library. We have built our library, and finally we want to pack it and be able to use it inside our other projects, or maybe just give it to just publish it to NPM so that the whole world can benefit from what you've done. So the next step for you should be to pack your library. And now packing your library should be done from where you have built it, which is inside the dist folder. So you go to the dist folder, and you can just write a script for that. So you go to the build folder inside the library, and then you finally run the command npm pack. Now, if you see here, what this would do is that it would take all the files which are inside the dist folder, and it would create a very small bundle of that. And as you can see, in the end, there's one pgz file which is created. And this is your library package that you have created. This contains the logic with all the TypeScript files, with the public API file, which is exposing your component or module. And if you notice here, the name is actually taken from the package.json of your library, from your library level. The first is the name of the library, which you have specified as the name. We'll look at that. Then the second bit is the version of the library. Now, it follows semantic versioning, major, minor, patch. So you can increase it as for that. If you're making any change which is not breaking anything, which is just a minor fix, you can just increase the patch version 002 and so on. And finally, the extension .pgz. So this is the package that you have created for your library. And now this particular package is to be passed on to wherever you want to use it. For example, a different application, or maybe the app in the similar, the same application with the new application that you will create here, which will be the consuming application. So now let's have a look at the different ways you can use our library, the library that we just created inside an application. And there are three ways of doing it. Either you can just do npm install and give the path to your library package that you just created, the tgz file, or you can simply link to that, not have a reference of it with here, but just link to the library that you're using. And the final thing that you can use is npm pack. So you just pack your library and maybe publish it to npm and install it from there. So now I have created one project inside the same workspace, and let's call it consume library, because you want to consume the library that you just created. And you would see that when you do ng generate application and whatever name you give to your application, it would go to the same folder, which is the project folder. It has one library already in there, but now it creates another folder for you, which is your app folder. It's not a library packet, it's not a library folder, but a application folder, because now you're trying to create an application. So inside that, Now you would want to install your library, right? And for that, you will have to use the whole path to your library, which is inside the disk folder and the name of your package, whatever is created. So as you can see here, I'm doing npm install and then the path to my techniquelib001.tgz file, the package. When it adds that, you will get to see that inside the packet.json, right, you'll get to see something like this, techniquelib, and then since you're referring to it locally, you would see this file parameter in the beginning before the path of your library. So this basically refers to you that it is, it is extracted or it is installed as a file, but not from web or anywhere, or maybe from npm, right? So once you have this available in your packet.json, this means that you have installed your library from locally somewhere, your application. Now, the next thing for you to check after installing your library is to finally use it. So you go to your app module, you quickly want to check if your library is installed or not, if the typing properly the morning of installing the typing correctly. It won't, because we have used Angular package format and all the typing definitions are being taken care of. So you go to your app module, you simply use import empty curly braces from and then the name of your library. And then you check when you type some of the component name from your library or the module name, does it give you the suggestions there? And I mean, obviously, if you have the IDE extension for you. So as you can see here, I have the different things that I exported from my public API IDEs file, which is the techniquelib component, the module, and the service. So I can import any of those here. And when I do that, the next step for me is to check, to add it to the imports array first of all. So as you can see here in the app module.ts, I have it imported from my library. Then I have added it to the imports array, this techniquelib module. Once I've done that, I should be able to use it inside the HTML, see it on the browser, right? So on the right of that, you can see that app.component.html, and I'm using the selector. Now to make sure, remember the selector, just go back to the library folder and check whatever in your inline template for the component that you're trying to use. So in my case, it's lib techniquelib. Now, if I run my application, I should be able to see the library, right? So this is my application running here. There's no code in the application. And as you can see in the previous slide, I removed all the HTML from the app component HTML and just referring to the selector of the library, and it just works, right? Yeah. So coming to the next part, which is quite an important part when you're building your library and creating your library, that is about publishing it to npm, because when you build something cool, why not share it with the world, right? Okay, so when you're trying to publish your library, the first step for you is to log into npm first of all. When you have done that, the second thing that you should check is what is the name of your library, what is the version of your library, right? So if you want to read more about semantic versioning and what is the exact pattern followed when versioning your libraries, you should just go to assembler.org and read more about that. And once you have verified the name and version of your library, you can simply publish it with the access flag as public, because you want the whole world to use it, don't we? So first of all, you logged in to npm with your username and password. Second, as in the first screenshot that you see here, I'm giving the name of my library as techniquelib. Then I have the version defined there, 001, since this is the first time I'm creating the library and there's no fixes or no changes. And this is the first time I'm publishing it. So the third thing that you see here is peer dependencies, which are all the dev dependencies required, compatible with your library. And if you try to publish this one, and let's say there already exists a package with the name technique-lib, what would you do? It is already existing, right? So the best way to handle such ways is to do it inside your scope. Now your npm username is your scope, right? So @Nishu Goel on npm is my scope. Whatever I install, whatever I publish inside that should be my own file. Even if libraries with same name exist anywhere else, it is under my scope. So I can create @Nishu Goel / whatever library name that I have. In this case, technique-lib. And this should totally work, because now my the package name is not just techniquelib, but @Nishu Goel /techniquelib. And then the same other fields like version and peer dependencies. Once you have the version and name sorted, you can finally go and publish your library using the simple command npm publish and the access as public. So once you've done that, you should be able to see your library on npm. And this is what something it would look like if you keep it. And the choice is totally yours if you want to keep it public or private. And yeah, this is kind of done, right? This is how your library is created, and this is how you can build it, use it locally, or just publish it to npm and then install it in any different project that you want to. But it should be an Angular project since it's an Angular library. And yeah, so I've shared this in two different repositories. The one is for creating a library. Now this tells you all the different ways of what is the pattern to follow, and how you can create all the different files as inline, though they already will be if you're using the CLI, and ng packager would do that for you. But you can take a reference from that. And if you want to then consume the same library either locally or from npm, then you could go to the second repo that I've shared here, which is for the consuming of the Angular library. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And these are some great resources for you to follow, and I also followed these, and these are great for if you're building your library. First of all, obviously the documentation. Then there's a great series blog actually on the Angular library series, and you might want to refer to that. It goes into detail of every step. For example, the creation step, then the publishing step. It also talks about the bundling of your library with a single command. It talks about ng packager, etc. Then if you're really interested of diving deeper into how Angular libraries work, each and every part about that, then there's this very interesting course about Angular libraries by Fabian Gosbrink. So you might want to check that. And if you just want to create your library step by step, just follow the exact steps as I told you today and create one. Just go to the step-by-step guide to creating your first library in Angular. And this is where I have specified each and every step and each and every error that I came across when I was creating my first library. So yeah, these are some great resources you might want to have a look at. And I'll share these slides. So yes, thank you very much. That's all.
That's great, Nishu. I think that was a session that people would love it. My quick question for you would be, what were some of the challenges that you faced when you were building your first library?
Oh, definitely. So first of all, right, I was not sure of any format that is there when you're creating your library. So that's when I came across Angular package format, and this document is out of the files that you should put across, and exactly how you should put them, and where to put the feature. And the major challenge that I faced when I was doing my library was 3 different packet.json, and I was every time getting confused. Maybe maybe either I would put a script command somewhere in the library packet.json, or I would pack the library from the root packet.json. So these were some of the challenges that where I was really coming across. But it made a lot more sense when I actually try to understand what I'm doing. And then 3 packet.jsons or 3 similar structures don't really matter to you, because then you understand there's one library, one root folder, and then one created bundle for your library, which you're finally gonna pack and send to the whole world. So yeah.
So I think, as you have said, all the resources you have shared with the viewers, I think they're definitely going to help people to develop the libraries and definitely avoid those challenges that you face, and especially the resources that you shared. So that's all, Nishu. I think that was an amazing session from you. We really appreciate. We'll take a coffee break for 15 minutes, right? And then we will be back once again for the second half of this session. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in the first half. We will be coming live once again on a different stream on all the same social media platform that we are streaming now. Once again, Nishu, thank you so much. I, Stephen Simon, on behalf of the entire CSharpCorner community, would like to thank you for the contributions that you are doing for the community. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.